To erase the one regret that had poisoned his entire life, Jansen slipped into the girls' locker room just as they were showering after class. Fresh from P.E., he crept along using the classic excuse of looking for a water fountain. The girls shouted for him to look away, and in that split second of distraction, he vanished into a small janitor's closet. He lurked in the shadows, watching intently. But make no mistake, he wasn't there to creep on anyone. He was hunting for someone specific. This was his second time in this exact place at this exact moment. The first time he was here, a nightmare had unfolded. Back then, a strange man had stormed into the girls' dorms. The instant the students spotted him, he panicked and bolted, trying to escape. Jansen had the perfect chance to stop him, but when their eyes met, he was paralyzed by fear. He froze, and that single moment of hesitation became the catastrophic mistake that ruined his life. That man wasn't trying to run away. He was there to hunt his prey. One unlucky young woman became the monster's target, a monster hiding in human skin. The attacker charged toward one of the shower stalls, where a girl was all alone, completely defenseless. She had no idea of the horror about to descend, and Jansen's fear gave the predator the perfect opening he needed. Before any help could arrive, the man savagely attacked the young woman. When he was finished, he murdered her without a shred of mercy. Jansen heard the screams echo through the halls, but he was powerless to move. In time, everyone else forgot about the incident, but he never could. That memory became a living nightmare, tormenting him every single night. The trauma shattered him, making it impossible to fit back into society. He dropped out of school and enlisted in the military. But that deep internal wound festered, twisting into a constant simmering rage that got him constantly reprimanded by his superiors, often for his explosive behavior. Even so, that fury never faded, no matter how many enemies he took down on the battlefield. Over time, he earned the nickname the Lone Wolf. During that period, he was on a mission to capture the boss of a notorious criminal syndicate. A seriously dangerous mission, but it ended in disaster when he was betrayed by his closest comrade. A betrayal that led to his entire squad being wiped out. That same traitor stabbed him with his own hands, but the inferno of rage inside him refused to let him die. When he next opened his eyes, he was in a completely different place, wearing clothes he didn't recognize. A concerned student approached him, noting that Jansen had been standing perfectly still for several minutes. The kid's face contorted in pure terror when he met Jansen's gaze and saw the eyes of someone who had stared directly into hell. Disoriented, Jansen asked if the kid was a student. The young man, just as confused, stammered out a yes. In Jansen's mind, he was still pinned down in the crime lord's hideout, so he assumed the kid was lying through his teeth. The boy, shaking, insisted they were inside a school. That single word brought Jansen to a dead stop. He demanded to know the date and the year. The answer knocked the wind out of him. 2015, 10 years before the day he was murdered. The other students, freaked out by the intense scene, slowly backed away, leaving Jansen standing alone. As he struggled to process the impossible, one thought clawed its way to the surface. He had traveled back in time. A quick glance in a nearby mirror showed him his own high school face staring back. To prove it wasn't a dream, he rocked himself with a full-force punch to the jaw. The searing pain confirmed it was all real, and if he was alive, it meant someone was about to pay. While walking, he overheard a group of girls gushing over some new hotshot celebrity they thought was incredibly handsome. That's when they saw Jansen staring at them with a bloody nose. To them, he just looked like some total creep, as if he was staring at them like objects, and it seriously weirded them out. They told him to look away, one of them calling him disgusting, making it painfully obvious their compliments were not directed at him. But Jansen wasn't looking at them with any interest. His gaze was locked on the girl standing in the center of the group, because he knew that in a matter of minutes, she was about to become the victim of a horrific tragedy, and he was ready to prevent it no matter what it took. A few minutes later, he stood before the entrance to the girls' dormitory. He could hear some girls whispering about a suspicious guy who had been seen lurking near the school's front gate. That was his cue. Jansen walked right in, head held low, excuse at the ready. He was just looking for some water. He claimed the water supply in the main classroom building had been shut off. To his shock, the lie actually worked, and the girls let him pass. They made it clear, though, that he better not cross any lines. He couldn't care less. All he could think about was when he would finally appear. He was ready to unleash 10 years of pent-up rage on that criminal. Then, right on schedule, a girl's scream ripped through the air outside. She'd spotted a strange man hiding in one of the rooms. Jansen immediately got ready. It was the exact same face from 10 years ago, charging toward him just like before. But this time, something fundamental had changed. Instead of fear, there was only fury. The only thing the criminal saw reflected in the kid's eyes was pure rage. The attacker tried to bolt, but a wall of female students instantly boxed him in. Jansen stalked towards him, moving like a predator, closing in for the kill. Trapped with two girls screaming their heads off, the man completely lost it, whipping out a knife and threatening everyone. But before he could even flinch, a bucket of water flew through the air and smashed violently against his face. The creep howled in pain, screaming he'd murder whoever did it, but as he spun around to find his attacker, the only thing he saw was a foot crashing down on his skull. In an instant, his body was launched into a nearby wall. Still, he turned out to be tougher than he looked, because he was still conscious, which was actually the worst possible sign for him. The moment he saw the look on Jansen's face, a violent tremor shot through his body. However, he remembered he was the one holding the blade, so using that dim-witted brain of his, he lunged at the young man, screaming like a maniac. But he missed like the complete loser he was. The kid then grabbed the attacker's wrist, gave it a gentle twist. A sickening crack echoed. And just like that, he was disarmed. It was like he was dealing with a toddler. When the man looked back at the kid, one of his legs was already airborne. Immediately, another brutal kick slammed into his head, making him see stars. Most of his teeth were already knocked out of commission. His dignity was obliterated, his soul halfway out the door. He dropped like a sack of trash, completely out cold. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was just about to begin. To everyone's horror, the kid channeled all the pent-up pain from his army days and started relentlessly pummeling the attacker's face. By the time he was done, the man's face looked like something straight out of a horror movie. This only fueled the kid's rage even more. He geared up to continue with another round, but just then a voice called out from the side. It got his attention, and when he turned, he was met with an almost heavenly sight. The girl, still in a panic, told him that if he kept going, the man was going to end up dead. But he didn't hear a single word she said. He was too busy staring at her for no apparent reason, which only cranked up her discomfort level to 1. Flustered and beet red, she was mentally chewing him out. Sure, he'd saved her life, but the way he was staring her down made her skin crawl with embarrassment. The cops finally rolled up, basically rescuing the criminal before our guy could change his mind and permanently delete him. An officer standing next to the kid remarked how insane it was that he'd handled the entire situation solo. He then asked if he had some kind of special ops training, but the kid just blew off the question. He mumbled something about seeing the move on TV once, but the cop wasn't buying it for a second. Not even trained commandos moved with the kind of lethal grace this kid possessed. Without a word of warning, the officer suddenly lunged at the young man, but his hand froze just inches from the kid's neck. He stopped dead. The kid, unlike any normal person who would have recoiled in terror, didn't even flinch. Worse, his eyes projected a killing intent so pure and intense that the officer broke out in a cold sweat. The kid calmly reminded him that trying to choke out a civilian probably wasn't in his job description, but the officer could only focus on that overwhelming aura of death pouring off the kid's body, wondering what in the hell he truly was. In that instant, the purple-haired girl, still not completely dressed, bolted towards them. Having seen the officer's move, she jumped to the kid's defense, insisting she would testify on his behalf. It was painfully obvious this girl was starting to catch feelings for this dude, running on 2 brain cells, whose only hobby seemed to be turning people into autopsy practice. Our protagonist, meanwhile, had zero reaction. He just stared at her, completely baffled. It was like all that time drowning in violence had totally rewired his way of thinking. When night finally fell, the kid made his way back to his old house. He pushed the door open and saw his mom sitting at the table. The moment she heard his voice, she started in on him like usual. Surprised he even remembered where he lived, she pointed out how late it was and that she and his dad had been waiting for him for dinner. On top of that, he'd come home without his school bag, so she just told him to go wash his hands. Seeing her face after all these years, hearing those painfully familiar complaints, something inside him just shattered. The sudden show of emotion stunned his mother. He never ever acted like this. Her concern spiked when she realized her son was crying for no apparent reason and begged to know what was wrong, but the boy just choked out that it was nothing. They both sat down for dinner, but the woman was still on edge and asked if something had been bothering him lately. She guessed it was pressure from school, but he denied it. Instead, he promised her that from this moment forward he would start listening to everything she said, and that he would hit the books hard. The woman let out a soft chuckle, telling him she'd be happy if he just stopped making her worry so much. They weren't expecting him to become some big shot. They just wanted him to graduate so his dad could hook him up with a government gig. The kid savored every single second, remembering how she used to nag him just like this, even in the past. Later that night, he collapsed onto his bed, completely drained from the chaos he'd survived at school. Still, he felt happy. Unlike his past life, he no longer had to stress about a bullet grazing his skull at any given moment. He also couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact he'd actually died and rewound time. Then there were the people responsible for his death. He vowed to forge a new destiny, leaving zero regrets behind. The next morning, as he walked onto campus, the first thing he saw was the grumpy janitor giving him a thumbs up. It wasn't just him, even the girls were staring, calling him cute and whispering about him. And to top it all off, these weren't just any girls, they were upperclassmen. His teachers, who usually looked half dead, seemed to have a new spark when they saw him. Our boy, however, was not vibing with all this attention. He was getting just for saving one girl. Besides, something else was bugging him. And just as he feared the moment he stepped into the classroom, he walked right into it. The entire class was buzzing about yesterday's incident, about how he demolished the criminal and saved the girl. Just as he was about to sit, an excited classmate told him he'd witnessed the whole thing with his own 2 eyes, and was blown away by his insane skills. Our hero casually asked if he wanted to learn them, and the kid's eyes lit up with excitement. But no classroom is complete without a designated hater. This room was no exception. One classmate, totally salty about all the attention the protagonist was getting, told him to stop showing off and out of nowhere slammed something onto his desk. In response to the attitude, our hero calmly asked if he had some business with him, not realizing he was poking a ticking time bomb that was ready to explode. The kid with the glasses ordered him to hand over the homework from yesterday. What he never expected was that our protagonist had actually done the assignment for once and gave it to him just to get him off his back. But to his utter shock, the punk ripped the entire paper in two right before his very eyes. After tossing it onto the desk, he demanded he redo the whole thing immediately. Even the bald friend jumped up, screaming about what he'd just done, but the guy completely ignored him and locked eyes with our hero again, telling him he had until the end of the day to redo and turn in the homework. By now, the bald kid was losing his mind, shouting and asking if they were trying to start a fight, but the number one lackey shut him down instantly, reminding him he was nothing but a shrimp and that he needed to shut his trap and obey. The most shocking twist, our protagonist told his friend to calm down and agreed to their demand, but on one condition. The four-eyed loser had to apologize for what he just did. Still, the idiot not taking him seriously sneered and asked what he had to apologize for, so our protagonist shoved the shredded paper in his face, telling him he needed to say sorry for his trashy attitude. The lackey couldn't stand to see his boss treated like that, and like a good little lapdog, he offered himself up as a sacrifice for the protagonist to unleash his fury on him instead, as if. The goon was left in total shock when his punch met nothing but empty air. Fuming, he geared up to try again, but at that exact moment, another student walked into the room, and like a sick joke, the idiot threw his punch. Our protagonist ducked, and the fist sailed right toward the poor girl who had no idea what was happening. Thinking fast, our hero managed to save his classmate at the last possible second, but the moron still managed to graze his cheek and clip the girl in the face. That was a capital offense, and our protagonist was ready to deliver the sentence. In a flash of fury, he grabbed the goon by the same arm he tried to hit the girl with a single sharp twist yanked his shoulder from its socket. The next thing everyone saw was the muscle head on the floor, screaming his lungs out. Of course, Glasses couldn't just watch his minion get wrecked like that and grabbed a chair. But before he could even lift it, our protagonist shattered it to splinters with one kick. And he wasn't finished. He grabbed the four-eyed idiot by the collar, ready to give him a little makeover for acting so arrogant. But just as he was about to connect, a voice cut through the air ordering him to stop. It was one of the teachers who, instead of blaming the actual culprit, started laying into our hero for using violence at school. The poor girl tried to explain what really went down, but the man cut her off, mid-sentence, ordering the kid to report to the disciplinary office in a few minutes. Our hero arrived at the office to find the same portly administrator waiting, and even knowing what happened, the man immediately started blaming him for everything. Our protagonist shot back, asking if he was supposed to just stand there and get beaten to a pulp instead of defending himself. The fat man reminded him that Glasses' kid's father was a major player, someone so powerful, not even the school's principal would dare to cross him. He explained that he understood kids his age were impulsive, but there are times in life when you just have to eat it, and this was one of them. He told him to write an apology, and then he could leave. Fuming, our protagonist decided to play along for now and walked back to the classroom. To his shock, the entire class erupted in cheers for him. As if he were a war hero, returning home, the girl he saved even brought him a bottle of water as a thank you. But he just brushed it off, saying it was no big deal, that the only thing that mattered was that she was safe. But there was one person who was not happy with all this newfound attention. The class bully was seething that everyone was treating him like a hero. Annoyed, he turned to the kid in the glasses. He asked if he should get some guys together to teach him a lesson after school, but for some reason, Glasses' kid told him not to. The bully was caught off guard and asked why, to which the other kid replied that he had something much better in mind. He then made a call to someone named Uncle Sal. It turned out the little monster wanted to frame our guy for a crime he didn't commit and get him thrown into a juvenile detention center. The next day, our protagonist was teaching his bald friend some martial arts. At the same time, the little gremlin was bouncing off the walls trying to impress our hero. Just then, a girl appeared at the classroom door, grabbing everyone's attention. It was the purple-haired girl Lynxie. She had come looking for our guy, but there was one small issue. The classroom was filled with teenage boys, a room packed with hormones. So instead of answering her, they all just stared at her legs. Luckily for her, she spotted our guy. She motioned for him to come outside from across the crowd, showing she wanted to talk. The kid hesitated, not wanting to draw even more attention to himself, but as usual, his friend gave him a nudge with a knowing smirk, basically telling him to bounce and not blow her shot. A few moments later, they were both standing in the hallway. That's when the girl, without a second thought, invited him over to her place that night. But it wasn't because he was about to get lucky. In reality, her father wanted to meet him, to properly thank him for saving his life. The most mind-blowing part, she was the daughter of Lin Jiming, the commander of the Eastern Theater, a name our guy knew all too well. The man had been one of the youngest ever to skyrocket to the rank of Major General. He was a legendary figure on the rise within the military, but for reasons nobody could figure out, he had supposedly stepped away from the core circle of power. Still, out of respect for the man, our protagonist accepted the card she handed him and asked her to pass along a message to the commander. Taking out scumbags was just part of his duty, so no thanks were necessary. The second he stepped back into the room, the first question was what the girl had said. Not in the mood to explain a single thing, our guy just joked that her father wanted him to marry into the family. Obviously, nobody was buying something that ridiculous. In that moment, he noticed someone approaching their table. It was the same four-eyed geek from before, claiming the principal was calling for him. A few minutes later, our hero walked into the principal's office, and with zero warning, the man just started unleashing on him, accusing him of trying to murder a student. It turns out the muscle-headed moron, the same one whose arm he dislocated, had filed a completely bogus report claiming he had severe head injuries, but our guy wasn't buying a single word of it. He even pointed out that the ink on the document wasn't even dry yet, asking if they really expected him to fall for such a low-effort fake. Even so, the principal slammed his fist on the table, demanding to know if he was questioning the hospital's report. Damn right he was. Our protagonist told him if he was so worried about the big oaf's condition, they could take a field trip to the hospital, and they could see for themselves if his injuries were legit or if they just botched the cover-up job. He warned the man that he knew exactly what they were trying to pull, and it would be smart to just stay out of this mess. Because not even that idiot's father was powerful enough to cover up the entire sky with one hand. That seemed to hit a nerve. The principal started stammering, completely lost for words, but just then, a knock echoed at the door and two police officers walked in. They looked shady as hell, and they were there to arrest our guy for intentional assault. With no other options, he decided to just play along for now, just to see how far this whole charade would go. Outside, the little rat who orchestrated the entire thing was waiting, not even trying to hide his triumphant smirk. The moron was so sure our hero was never coming back that he shamelessly admitted to being the one pulling all the strings. But our guy was actually thrilled by the little game that had just kicked off, because this fool had no idea that in his past life, he ate bullies like this for breakfast. A couple minutes later, our protagonist was sitting in an interrogation room. The very first thing the cop did was toss a confession paper at him demanding he sign it. But our guy suggested that instead of wasting time with him, they should check the phone of Jean Chong, who was the four-eyed lackey, and look at his transfer records. He also made one thing crystal clear: he wasn't saying a damn thing until his lawyer showed up. Since he had time to kill, he decided to have a little fun with them. He gestured at the cameras, saying he knew they weren't even working. On top of that, they didn't have a warrant. Their uniforms were out of regulation, they never showed any ID, and their procedures were riddled with mistakes. To top it all off, their interrogation skills were straight-up amateur hour. The men got visibly flustered hearing this, wondering if they'd massively screwed up by messing with the wrong person. Because this kid knew every single loophole in the system like the back of his hand. Hearing them whispering, our guy told them to bring in their superior, someone who actually understood the rules. That's when a man who had been listening from outside the entire time stepped in. It was the chief of police, Don Lee. The sleazeball informed him that those rules don't apply to everyone. He explained that our hero's mistake was messing with dangerous people and ordered him to sign the paper, even promising to shave 3 years off his sentence if he cooperated. But our guy, without backing down an inch, just told him he was trying way too hard to suck up. He called him out for being nothing more than a deputy chief, desperate to climb the ranks, and that if he kept groveling to get ahead by any means necessary, sooner or later, he was going to end up falling flat on his face. That comment struck a nerve. The man lost his cool, warning the kid he was playing with fire. He was dead wrong if he thought they wouldn't take action against him. Just then he heard one of his goons tell him he had a call. When he asked who it was, he was absolutely stunned to hear that command headquarters was on the line. Of course, it was our hero himself, who had engineered that very call. The young man looked at the sweating idiot and told him to go on and answer the phone, since he wasn't planning on going anywhere. Seeing the look on our protagonist's face, the chief had a gut feeling this was not going to end well. But with no other choice, he answered the call, and the very first thing he heard from the other end made him even more frantic. Still. But the moron, completely missing the memo, started muttering some nonsense about proper procedure before he could even finish his sentence. 2 military officers stormed into his office. Turns out the man with the scar was one of Linsenband's subordinates, who had come down personally to retrieve the kid. The hefty officer, seeing them bust in like that, tried to whine about them breaking the rules, but the next thing he saw was a pistol aimed squarely at his forehead, and the man made it crystal clear this was just how he did business. A moment later, both men arrived at the interrogation room, where the young man was waiting for them, perched like a king, on top of the desk. Scarface, still fuming at the portly officer, demanded to know why they had detained the kid, without a legitimate reason, asking if he had a death wish for laying a hand on one of Colonel Lin's people. It became clear our hero had been a step ahead from the very beginning ever since that damn Four Eyes had targeted him. He'd sensed something was off, which is why he had his young assistant on standby telling him to call a specific number if he didn't return soon. And now that the bastard had thrown the first punch, our protagonist had zero reason to hold back. By then, Officer Ji Ching-san had also composed himself and handed some papers to the hefty officer, ordering him to sign them and release the boy. The man didn't hesitate for a split second because compared to the Lin family, that four-eyed loser and his father were absolute nobodies. And with the military backing this kid, he understood this wasn't someone he could afford to mess with. So proving he wasn't as clueless as he looked, he decided to switch allegiances and started sucking up to the kid. A few minutes passed, and the two were seen heading back in a military vehicle. Inside, Officer Ji Ching-san was smirking at the young man, pointing out that the gun was completely empty, no bullets, so he hadn't technically violated any protocols. Besides, if they both kept their mouths shut, nobody would ever find out. When he finished, he turned to the young man to thank him for rescuing his commanding officer's daughter. Our protagonist, cool as ever, made it clear that the officer had also bailed him out, so they were even now. With a grin, the officer mentioned he'd heard the kid was ridiculously skilled for his age and wanted to see for himself just how good he was. As he tightened his grip, our hero, knowing exactly what was coming, realized he was about to be tested right then and there. And sure enough, without any warning, the officer lunged to attack him. But our protagonist managed to shift at the last possible second and countered with his own strike. The man, equally swift, dodged it too. The driver reminded them they were approaching a military patrol and that they needed to cool it. The officer thanked him for the heads up, since if he got caught fooling around in the vehicle, he'd surely be forced to write another report. Our hero felt the same way, though he wasn't quite sure why, seeing as he wasn't in the army and didn't have to write anything. Moments later, they pulled up to the location. The officer motioned for the kid to head straight inside to meet the top dog. The officer himself hung back. The kid was a total handful, and his entire body was screaming in pain, a fact that even shocked the man. Not many people could leave him in that kind of state. Meanwhile, our boy arrived at the meeting spot and sat down across from the man in charge. The kid thanked him for the save, but the man shot back that he should be the one getting thanked. After all, he had protected the life of his only daughter. The protagonist's response was the same as before. He just felt that he was simply serving up justice. Even so, the man was seriously impressed that this kid had charged head-on at a thug who was armed with a knife, all to save someone. Suddenly, he produced a classified file and slid it across the table. It turned out the papers were all about the guy with glasses and his father, who'd been under surveillance for a while now, for their dirty business and hidden agendas, and how they'd been suspiciously expanding their connections. The man explained their plan was to cut them off completely and soon. He promised the kid that they would get payback on those two for what they'd pulled that day. But our boy had something else cooking in his head, because in his previous life, right around this time, that very man had been arrested for his crimes. Back then, however, a cool $6 million in bribe money had mysteriously disappeared, only to be found later in the ruins of the mansion belonging to the Yang family. A smirk crept across his face as he remembered that, and the man asked if he had something on his mind. Oh, he did. His plan: infiltrate the mansion and yoink all that cash without the owner ever finding out. Night fell, and our protagonist suited up, rocking his cheapest thief outfit complete with a weird hat to cover his giant head. And in classic stealth mission style, he began tiptoeing out of the house. That's when he spotted his mom, passed out on the couch having stayed up late watching a horror movie. But what really threw him was hearing her mumble in her sleep that she wanted to break both his and his father's legs for goofing around all the time and pushing her to her limit. Still, as he was slipping out of the apartment, he heard her tell him to come back early after school, which brought a smile to the protagonist's face. He knew how much his mom actually cared. After making some good time, he finally arrived outside the Yang family's villa. The whole place was crawling with security cameras, but he somehow managed to slip past them completely undetected. Once he was in position, he set the timer on his watch and vaulted inside like a ninja. Weirdly enough, there wasn't a lot of security on the inside. Tapping into his past life memories, he knew the money had been found in an abandoned garden decoration. But since the exact location was a mystery, he started casing the entire area. To hide that kind of cash, the decoration had to be huge. That's when he spotted a fountain in the distance and figured that might be the spot, since not only was it large enough to hide the money, but it was also running in the dead of night, which was super suspicious. As he was scoping it out, a guard suddenly appeared on patrol. As the guard got closer, he heard a rustle nearby. He immediately went on high alert, realizing that someone had breached the villa's perimeter. But on a closer look, he saw it was just a fluffy white cat. Shrugging it off, he decided to head back and get some rest. After the guard bounced, the cat noticed a ripple in the water, and out climbed our protagonist, drenched from head to toe, looking pissed as hell and clutching bags stuffed with cash. It turned out there was a hidden compartment inside the fountain where they stashed the loot, and he'd gotten lucky finding it fast. But another problem popped up. 6 million in cash was a lot bulkier than he had imagined, and it wasn't all going to fit in his backpack. That's when he spotted something in the distance and a brilliant idea sparked. A moment later, he was strolling out of the villa, pushing a cart overflowing with money. There were no cameras or guards in his path, just a kid casually walking away from a powerful official's house with 6 million bucks in tow. All of a sudden, he saw a car barreling toward him at full speed, screeching to a halt right behind the kid. It was young Tianli stumbling home after a night of getting wasted with his buddies, and he was completely hammered. The first thing he did was kick the pile of bags, thinking it was just garbage, all while cussing out our protagonist for making him look like a fool in front of everyone. But then he froze, and taking a closer look, he noticed it wasn't trash, it was money. By that point, our protagonist was already right behind him, and he landed a clean chop to the back of his neck, knocking him out cold. He didn't appreciate being called trash. Besides, the guy was a drunk minor driving without a license, model, and that just pushed him over the edge. This dude was the textbook definition of a spoiled rich kid, so as a little going-away present, he decided it was time to teach him a lesson. He hoisted the drunk kid's head up, and with a knife in hand, started giving him a fresh new cut, one that perfectly matched his rotten personality. Before the kid could even stir, the job was done. The next morning, he managed to slip back home without a hitch, only to hear his mom banging on his door, telling him to get up. But after being out all night, he was completely drained. He just told her he was feeling sick, hoping she'd back off. The woman told him to grab some breakfast when he came down, mentioning she was heading to the temple to pray. When he asked why, she explained that she believed their house was haunted. She'd found a kitchen knife caked with somebody's hair, and there were also puddles of water right at the entrance. She was absolutely convinced it was the work of a ghost. The actual ghost had no idea how to even respond to that, so he just stayed dead silent, while his mom went on and on with her superstitions. The following day, that same security guard was returning to the mansion when he spotted a drunk passed out, asleep right outside the gate. He kicked him awake with a shout, thinking he was some trespasser, completely clueless that the guy he was booting was the son of the mansion's owner. The second he recognized him, the guard started panicking, apologizing profusely and asking what he was doing, sleeping on the street. The four-eyed kid, still totally dazed, had no clue what had happened and tried to piece together the events of the previous night. That's when he felt something bizarre on his head. Looking down, he saw clumps of his own hair scattered on the pavement. It hit him that someone had given him a butchered haircut, but the real question was, who had the balls to do something like that to him? He didn't care and started screaming that he was going to have his father murder whoever was responsible. If only the moron knew the person he was hunting was the very same guy he'd tried to throw in prison. With that, he sprinted towards his house, yelling for his dad to catch the culprit, but he froze dead in his tracks the moment he burst inside. His father was in handcuffs, being led out by two officers. The young man tried to block their path, demanding to know who they were and where they were taking him. One of the officers calmly explained they were from the Anti-Corruption Bureau and were there to arrest him on suspicion of major felonies. The kid just stood there, frozen completely, at a loss for words. His father told him there was no way out of this and pleaded with him to take care of himself, because he was certain he wasn't coming back. Meanwhile, our protagonist transitioned from a fighting machine to an exhausted strategist dozing off in class. It was then that his classmate rushed over with the breaking news of Yan Tianli's father being arrested. But since our hero showed zero reaction, his classmate was baffled and demanded to know why. The reality was he himself had played a direct role in that outcome, but all he offered was a simple line about how, when you do too much dirt, it eventually comes back to bite you. Then he told the guy to beat it because he was exhausted. His nosy friend then asked what he'd been up to all night to look so wiped out. On top of that, he pointed out that our protagonist smelled strange, annoyed by all the questions he just shot back that he went diving in the river to catch fish last night. A couple of hours later, he was seen walking back home, when he overheard the news of the arrest spreading like wildfire. This got him thinking, because thanks to his interference, that man was arrested way ahead of schedule. Plus, the money he snatched was never supposed to be his, and he started to wonder if all these changes might seriously mess with the original timeline. But he decided not to dwell on it, and focused on the 6 million, wondering where he should even begin to spend it. His primary objective remained the same, getting revenge on the people who stabbed him in the back. However, $6 million wasn't nearly enough to assemble a crew capable of going up against that man. He considered investing the money somewhere to generate a steady income, like buying a building and renting it out. But he decided against it, since a poor kid suddenly showing up and buying a multi-million-dollar property would raise way too many red flags. It would look incredibly suspicious. Lost in these thoughts, he wandered into an alley, where a group of thugs was beating some guy to a pulp. It looked like a mugging, and since he didn't want any part of it, he decided to just wait for them to finish so he could pass by. But then he saw the victim's face and froze on the spot, because it was the same fat cop who had tried to throw him into a juvenile detention center just a little while ago. What were the odds He was trying to figure out where to invest his dirty money, and he stumbles upon a corrupt police department director, getting his ass handed to him in broad daylight. Just as he was trying to process this insane situation, one of the goons, the one with a ridiculous-looking beanie, lifted a steel pipe and slammed it right onto the back of the officer's neck, leaving him on the ground out cold. Instead of bailing, the idiot started freaking out, wondering if they'd actually just killed him with that blow. The guy in the beanie, just to be sure, geared up to hit him again, but before he could swing, he spotted our guy sitting up on a tree branch. A blur of motion exploded towards him. Before the official could even react, our protagonist launched into the air and smashed him with a kick so brutal it flattened the guy on the pavement. The rest of the goon squad was not happy with this development. The officer, still breathing, looked up to see his savior, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized the face. A couple of minutes later, our hero had already wiped the floor with the remaining thugs, then strolled over to check on the man. He asked what a suit like him was doing in a grimy place like this. The man explained he was on an undercover inspection, which is how he ended up getting jumped. But the real question was why he came alone, when everyone knew. This area was crawling with trouble. The man then offered to hire him as his personal bodyguard, to tag along on these inspections. Naturally, our protagonist shot him down and got ready to bounce. So as a thank you, the official offered him a ride home in his car. A short while later, they were cruising towards our hero's place, while the official whined about how mercilessly the thugs had beaten him. He genuinely thanked the kid for saving his life, admitting he'd probably be laid up in a hospital bed without him. But our protagonist wasn't interested in a pity party, and reminded him that the old district's security was a complete disaster that needed a total overhaul. The man agreed, but pointed out their hands were tied. They couldn't make a move without getting the green light from Officer Lin first. Our hero told him he knew that, but since Officer Lin was swamped with other problems, they needed to handle things themselves. Besides, he pointed out that if the official ever wanted to climb the corporate ladder, he couldn't just rely on undercover gigs. He needed to score some massive wins of his own, and that meant taking some serious risks. Confused, the man asked what he was getting at, and our protagonist revealed he had a plan to get filthy rich and was scouting for a partner he could trust. The man, still lost, asked what he had in mind. Our hero told him about an old district in the east that was secretly slated for demolition. This bombshell floored the official, who had no idea, and if they scooped up buildings there before the news went public, they could rake in a fortune. But there was the issue of cash. Buying up that area wouldn't be cheap, and without the right connections, they wouldn't get far. The protagonist told him not to sweat the money or the contacts because he had all of that under control. He needed someone on the inside to manage the logistics and keep the paperwork looking squeaky clean, and the official was the perfect man for the job. So the protagonist laid it out. Was he in or out? The man jumped at the chance, but out of curiosity, had to ask how. He knew something so top secret. Our protagonist simply said, "That's a secret." The following day, our hero was chatting with his assistant, while the rest of the class was in self-study mode. Suddenly, he spotted a strange figure approaching. It was the loud-mouthed bully from before, who to everyone's utter shock collapsed to his knees right in front of him, after getting put in his place. The reason he was there, to desperately plead for him to save his father from the Lin family. He claimed our hero was the only person he knew with actual connections to them, and in return, swore he would do anything. No one was vibing with this pathetic scene, and the entire classroom erupted in laughter at the sight of the former top dog, reduced to such a miserable state after losing everything. He just knelt there, taking every single insult, knowing that without his dad's influence he was completely powerless. As for our protagonist, he wasn't exactly thrilled by this new look either. Not because the guy didn't deserve it, but because he had wasted so much time, giving him that sick fade only for the idiot to show up completely bald. And since he couldn't stand watching a grown man groveling and crying in front of him, he told him to get up, explaining that a man shouldn't break down so easily. Hearing that the bully thought he was about to get help, but our protagonist immediately clarified that he never said that. He reminded the fool that his father was arrested under the full extent of the law, and that as his son, he should be well aware of what his old man did to end up in that mess. He suggested that, instead of trying to pull strings to get him out, he should cooperate with the investigation. The dude finally understood that there was no saving his dad, so he stopped wasting his time and turned to leave. But before walking away, he hurled one last warning, vowing to make sure our protagonist lost everything, just like he had. Yeah, the unhinged idiot was basically cursing him, hoping he'd lose all his hair and end up just as bald. That night, the fool was scheming with his lackeys, who were having serious doubts about his plan. But the bald clown ordered them to shut their mouths and do as they were told. Still, they tried to reason with him, saying it'd be better to just jump the guy, instead of burning down an entire building. But by that point, he was completely off his rocker and told them they had to make sure it looked like an accidental fire. Left with no choice, the idiots got ready to set the blaze, but right as they were about to light it up, a voice echoed from behind them, making them jump. Terrified, the bald man whipped around to see who it was. He was wondering what they planned to do about his house. Seeing him appear from thin air, the bald man ordered his lackeys to take care of him first. But it turned out these were the exact same thugs our protagonist had already thrashed in the alley, so they were terrified of him. Even so, the bald leader didn't give a damn and demanded they obey. The men immediately started cooking up excuses to get out of the situation. Annoyed by the racket, our protagonist told them there was no need to argue since they were all about to get wrecked anyway. Then he lunged at the first guy, and he slapped him with every ounce of his strength. The blow was so brutal, the guy's face nearly caved in, sending him to the floor completely unconscious. The bald guy, still too slow to process what had just happened, ordered the second man to take his turn. The thug just turned around and started backing away, claiming he'd just remembered he left the gas on at his house and had to leave immediately. The bald man screamed after them, calling them ungrateful cowards for abandoning him in a moment like this. It was then that he heard our protagonist's voice ask if he was ready for what was coming next. The fool, feeling the immense pressure radiating from our hero's body, started breaking out in a cold sweat. But instead of begging for his life, he decided to attack. Before he could even make a move though, our protagonist was already in his face. He grabbed him by the arm, and in that instant, the bald man knew he couldn't win no matter what, so like the true coward he was, he started apologizing. He reminded our hero that they were still classmates and claimed he was only joking around. Next thing he knew, a fist connected squarely with his jaw, launching him into the air. A couple of minutes passed, and the police arrived on the scene. It was the same hefty officer named Don Lee, who had recently tried to lock the kid up on fake charges, and he ordered his man to arrest the young man for trespassing and assaulting a civilian. But he wasn't talking about our protagonist. He was pointing at the bald guy whose face was completely swollen from the beating and who was asking why he was being arrested. Screaming that he was the one who got jumped, he started cussing out the officer, trying to pull the "do you know who my father is" card. But the man, used to hearing all sorts of trash talk, didn't even flinch. He simply told him that it seems his father forgot to teach him this. But in moments like this, you had to watch before you spoke. As a final jab, he told the guy he'd been playing with fire. And this was the endgame. He gave the order, and they hauled the man away, turning his attention back to our protagonist. He thanked him for his hard work, offering to take him somewhere cultural to unwind, but our MC, clearly not feeling the vibe, just said he was dipping. He told him he had to bounce, because he had business to handle the next day. The following morning, our protagonist arrived on site with the man. As they surveyed the area, the man was visibly pissed at the rundown state of the place, but our protagonist knew better. He knew this plot of land was a straight-up gold mine, because the last time it was demolished, it created 17 multimillionaires. Since he couldn't just say that he casually mentioned hearing that this area was part of the satellite city's expansion plan, he laid it out. A new high-tech industrial zone was about to send land prices through the roof, and the demolition compensation would skyrocket right along with it. The fool, not even questioning how he knew all this, just laughed and said he'd made the right call teaming up with him. Our protagonist just reminded him to hurry it up. They couldn't waste the whole day at just one location. A few minutes later, our protagonist was standing inside a bar. He was in the middle of buying it from an old man when the fat guy piped up, commenting on how nice the spot looked. He wanted to know why he was selling. The old man sighed, explaining it was all his son's fault, who'd racked up massive gambling debts. Now loan sharks were showing up every single day, demanding their money. That's why he was forced to sell the bar, just to pay them off. If he didn't, they were threatening to just take the building by force. The fat guy was not thrilled to hear that. But our protagonist started getting suspicious. It felt way too weird that these debt collectors were so interested in the place, especially right before it was scheduled to be demolished. So he asked the old man for the name of the guy holding the debt. It turned out to be some dude named Chen Jingshu. The old man explained this guy seemed more fixated on getting the building itself than actually getting the debt repaid, which is why he was terrified of losing everything and had put up the urgent sale sign. That detail clicked everything into place for our protagonist. He decided to head out and do some digging on his own. When Director Don asked where he was going, our protagonist shot back that there was someone else who, just like them, knew exactly what was about to go down in this area. Elsewhere in the city, a man stared out his window, but the real view was happening behind him. A woman with an absolutely stacked figure was asking him why he was looking outside when he had a much better sight. Right behind him, the man hit her back with some cheesy line about how a king has to survey his territory. This guy was none other than Chen Jinghu, the same one. The old man mentioned a major player who ran casinos, loan sharking, transportation, and pretty much any business you could think of, where he could stack some serious cash. His operations sprawled across the entire metropolis, earning him the nickname Chen Half City, and the word on the street was once the sun went down, he became the true shadow ruler of everything. Meanwhile, the portly Don Lee was spilling all this to our protagonist, his voice laced with panic. If a powerhouse like Chen had his eyes on the demolition project, they were completely screwed. To make matters a million times worse, Chen had deep connections inside the family. The Chen family in the capital. That last detail snagged our hero's attention because the very person he was hunting was also tied to that same family. If he could topple this guy, he could use him as a stepping stone to get closer to his real targets. Seeing a smirk spread across his face, the big guy was baffled, asking if the protagonist knew someone else from that family. The answer was a chilling yes. And since this man worked directly under them, the plan was simple: eliminate him. Crushing him would shatter their network and create the perfect opening. With that settled, he told the big guy to push forward with the paperwork to acquire the building while he handled the messy stuff. Elsewhere, Shin Jin-Hu was absolutely raging when he found out the bar had been bought out from under him. Standing before him was some pretty boy subordinate, trying to explain what happened, but Chen was so livid he didn't even let him finish. A savage backhand sent the kid reeling, and Chen began ranting, venting about all the hard work he'd poured into that place. Just then, a strange-looking man burst into the room. This dude turned out to be his manager, rushing in with critical intel to calm him down. The manager flashed him a photo of our protagonist and the big guy. Chen completely blew past the pretty boy, who looked like a psycho fresh out of an asylum, and immediately recognized the big guy. He knew him as the bootlicker who worshipped the Yan family at every opportunity. What really got him, though, was how that snake hadn't gone down with the rest of them, considering he was involved in all their shady deals. As for our protagonist, he had no clue who this guy was. His vibe was all wrong for someone in the underworld. When Chen finally simmered down, he told the blondie not to make any direct moves against Don Lee. As for the mystery kid, he ordered a complete file on his entire life to be on his desk within 3 days. Before leaving, he turned back to the guy he'd just smacked. As a little motivation, he ordered him to take some men and stake out the bar. But if he screwed up again, he was going to get him castrated and sent to work as a gigolo, basically a death sentence. Outside, our protagonist and his partner were heading toward their destination. For some reason, his partner was getting cold feet, hesitating. They were walking straight into Chen Jinghu's territory after all. Our MC knew that perfectly well, and just ordered him to keep moving and stick to the plan. After a short walk, they reached the spot where his partner was supposed to lie low and wait for the signal. The protagonist planned to dive headfirst into the enemy's den all by himself, so he reassured the kid that no one would even look twice at him as long as he stayed hidden. His partner was still on the fence, but the protagonist knew exactly how to push his buttons. He brought up that brand new gaming console that just dropped, asking him if he didn't want it. That did the trick. With his partner motivated, our hero prepared to launch his operation to take down Shin Jin-Jo. His plan wasn't exactly detailed, but the gist of it was to infiltrate the enemy's main hideout, a place swarming with thugs while being completely unarmed. And for some reason, the psycho looked absolutely thrilled. In his past life, he had raided this exact place with his team, so he knew the layout like the back of his hand. Thanks to that inside knowledge, he walked straight up to a secret entrance and knocked. A guy appeared claiming they weren't open tonight. This was the secret password to get in, and our MC knew the perfect response. He shot back that whether you do business or not all depends on luck. The password worked. The guard greeted him, but he was still curious who this new face was. But our protagonist gave him just enough of an answer to shut him up. Then, with that lazy smirk of his, he said he was there to have some fun, and asked what kind of services they offered. That turned out to be the magic phrase, because the very next thing he saw was an entire line of gorgeous women walking right toward him. The protagonist strolled through the establishment with a blonde woman on his arm, scanning a room packed with miserable men who had already gambled away their entire lives. The woman, oozing that sweet and seductive charm, leaned in close, purring that he didn't look like these other losers. She claimed he had luck written all over his face and was destined for a huge win that day. But our hero knew she was just trying to gas him up so he'd end up just as broke as the rest of them. Still, he had no intention of backing down. The protagonist knew this game wasn't just about luck. The woman had no idea what he was getting at, so he reminded her that working in a place like this, she should know better than anyone. Since she kept nagging him, he ditched her and headed for the counter. Slapping down cash for 100,000 in chips, he immediately locked his eyes on the first suckers, eyeballing him from across the room. He decided to make them his first victims. He took a seat, and the man across from him began to set up the game. The rules weren't exactly clear, but our protagonist ended up holding an ace of hearts, a king of spades, and a queen of clubs. It wasn't a killer hand, but it was solid enough. He then glanced at the heavy-set guy beside him, who was, for some bizarre reason, sniffing his own hand. Looking closer, he noticed the guy's ear twitching and the muscles in his face pulling upwards, a dead giveaway that he was holding a monster hand. The dude with the long hair on the other side was a tougher read, but our hero spotted a disgusting, overgrown nail on his pinky finger. He was positive it wasn't just for decoration. That thing was definitely used for marking cards. As he was analyzing them, the dealer announced that all cards were dealt and asked if anyone wanted to up the ante. The long-haired guy just called, while the big dude raised by 5,000. Then it was our hero's turn. Without even blinking, he shoved his entire stack forward, going all in. The heavy-set guy was stunned. It was the very first play of the night. He started wondering if this new guy was actually holding something better than him. The long-haired man just assumed the protagonist was trying to bluff his way to a win. Seeing their hesitation, our hero pulled a legendary move. He held up his hand, playing the part of a total rookie, and asked if his hand was big. Acting completely clueless, the other man had no idea how to even respond. The other two players figured they were walking into a trap, so in the end, both of them folded. But when it was time for the reveal, they looked like absolute fools when they saw the protagonist's cards. His hand was way worse than either of theirs. Enraged, they slammed the table and screamed for another round. But by that point, our protagonist was already walking off with his mountain of chips. Just then, that same blonde came running toward him. Her eyes lit up, absolutely gleaming at the stack of chips he was carrying. Realizing our hero was now loaded with cash, she started swaying her hips and flashed a phony smile, suggesting he could now afford to buy her older sister a drink. But our protagonist just called her ma'am, making it crystal clear he was still in school, so she needed to keep all that bouncing far, far away from him. That was the absolute last thing the woman wanted to hear. Ignoring her wounded pride, the protagonist asked where he could find some faster-paced games. The woman, still seething from the ma'am comment, forced a smile and led him to a table where she was certain he'd lose it all. It was a dice game, where the goal was to guess the correct numbers to win. While all the idiots around him were screaming, our protagonist simply focused on the sound of the dice tumbling inside the shaker. And somehow he managed to pinpoint the exact numbers. Feeling lucky, he bet everything he had and shockingly won. It turned out this wasn't even his first victory. He'd been cleaning out multiple tables at the venue, which had the manager absolutely furious. He was the one who'd have to explain this to the boss, but our protagonist couldn't have cared less. He demanded they start the next round because he had no time to waste. But someone had been watching him the entire time. And that someone was none other than Chen Jinghu, who was losing an absolute fortune thanks to our protagonist. Livid, he ordered his manager to call in the Japanese table. But by then, our hero had already won several more rounds and had millions sitting in front of him. The poor manager was on the verge of tears. And everyone in the room knew why. After losing this much money, the casino would probably sell him off to some loan sharks to cover the losses. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and in walked a dangerous woman flanked by 2 bodyguards. Just seeing her from the back, it was clear she was not someone the protagonist could easily mess with. She ordered the dealer to step away. She would be handling things personally. She then fixed her gaze on the protagonist. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and he felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like he'd seen this woman before. It was then that the manager introduced her as Miss Nohama Chizuru, who would be taking over the game from now on. That name hit the protagonist like a freight train. This woman was supposed to be in the Golden Triangle, and he knew he was right, because one look into those razor-sharp eyes was all the confirmation he needed. This woman was without a doubt trouble walking on 2 legs. After that, the scene shifts to another location where someone appears to be discussing an important matter. That someone was our same hero, who by the looks of it was on a date with a certain person, and that person was the exact same dangerous woman. It turns out that in the past, or perhaps in the future, they had some kind of history. Back in that moment, the protagonist began to sip the liquor the woman had poured for him, but he suddenly heard her ask him not to close it. Confused, he tried to figure out what she was talking about. The woman, now standing on top of the table for some reason, insisted again that he not close his eyes. She explained that his eyes looked like a wolf's, and she really enjoyed that fierce look. Piercing, so he told her to keep his attention. Watching her, he thought she was like a dangerous predator, one trying to trap him in her claws. For her part, she swore she wouldn't dig into his secrets, claiming she just wanted his company for the night to make him feel good. In the end, they spent the entire night together, and with the liquor flowing, she talked. A lot. She spilled the secret of the dice, how to truly listen to them, and other tricks of the trade. And in that time, surprisingly, it seemed our guy had actually caught feelings for her. Flash forward to now, and that very same woman was shaking the dice, ready to make her move. The protagonist watched her every move, his focus absolute, listening to the rattle of the dice inside the cup. When she slammed it down, he absorbed every single detail, even the subtle way she shifted her body weight, and he instantly knew the exact number. The woman, oozing confidence, told him to place his bet, and him, despite whatever he might have felt for her. In the past, he decided to completely shatter her world and bet everything on a 333. The entire room went dead silent, but no one was more shook than she was, because she knew right then that she was finished. The protagonist, cool as ever, just told her to lift the cup already. She hesitated for a split second, but she knew there was no way out. And of course it was 3 threes, just as he had called it. Everyone was frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The manager understood in that instant that they were screwed. That single bet was worth over 50 million. The protagonist, showing zero emotion, continued to act like this was just some casual date from back in the day, simply thanking the woman for everything. Meanwhile, Jinho was absolutely livid that some punk kid had just walked into his territory and wrecked the entire place. Just then, the club's pretty face sprinted in with urgent news. He reported that the guy they were hunting was the same one who had just cleaned out their casino. The man was already looking for an excuse to end the protagonist, and now he had one. He ordered his men to grab their weapons, because they were about to put this kid 6 feet under. By this point, our hero was already cashing out his winnings, telling Denny to get ready. Right on cue, the loudmouth and his crew of thugs stormed into the room to confront him. Without a word, the goon swung a massive machete right at the protagonist, intending to slice him to ribbons. But just before the blade could connect, every single light in the building went out, and chaos erupted. Everyone started freaking out. When the emergency power kicked on, the attacker was no longer standing. They found him on the floor, completely knocked out cold. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already outside the building, with his haul telling Denny it was time to bounce. As he stepped out, he failed to notice someone watching him from a distance, and that someone turned out to be the same blonde woman from before, the one who tried to rob him. She hit him with a threat, saying that if he wanted to live, he'd drop the briefcases on the ground and walk away. As if he'd ever be scared by that. He shot back a blunt reply, calling her lady and telling her to get out of his way because he was in a hurry. The woman, pissed, ordered her goons to rough him up and take the money by force. The protagonist let out a sigh, thinking that hassling a woman wasn't on his to-do list, so he'd have to settle this the hard way. The woman clarified that it wasn't her he'd offended, but her boss. To him, it didn't matter who was mad. He just saw more obstacles in his path, and he knew exactly how to deal with them. With that, the 3 thugs rushed him. But before they could even attack, the protagonist closed the gap in an instant. The first guy didn't even have time to react before his arm was caught. Then he saw a fist coming, and with one solid punch to the face, the dude went flying. Seeing their buddy on the ground, the other 2 froze up, but the protagonist wasn't done asking them if they really planned on running. That's exactly what they wanted to do. But they couldn't just let him walk off with all that cash, so they charged him together. The protagonist leaped into the air and brought his foot down hard on the necks of both men, knocking them out instantly. And just like that, all 3 were out of the fight, leaving only the woman, who was now trembling with fear. The protagonist, not caring that she was a woman, made it clear that it was her turn to take a nap. The poor girl, completely terrified, just burst into tears and sprinted away. The protagonist, true to form, didn't waste a second trying to stop her. What did surprise him, though, was how insanely fast she could run in those heels. At that moment, Denny popped out from his hiding spot. Apparently, he'd found the backup generator and ripped out the power cables for the entire street, asking if he'd done a good job. For the protagonist, bringing this guy along was already feeling like a mistake because Denny was way too hyped about all this. But it finally clicked, he was straight up toxic for Denji, who was now spitballing some seriously wild ideas. Ideas like dropping out of school to live the thug life. Our protagonist knew he had to bounce and do it quietly. He had to disappear before he completely poisoned Denji's mind. Meanwhile, the blonde girl sprints toward the headquarters, ready to report the whole fiasco. But as she bursts in, she finds the entire crew huddled around something. Ignoring the weird vibe, she spills everything that went down outside. She's demanding backup to hunt the kid down, but instead of a reply, she just sees the boss's hand slowly rising for no apparent reason. And before she can even process it, bam! He clocks her across the face, pinning the blame on her for letting the target escape. The girl scrambles for an excuse, but the man silences her, claiming he's already watched the security footage. He calls her out for getting way too chummy with the boy, accusing her of being a double agent. She frantically denies it all, swearing her loyalty to her master. The guy couldn't care less. He needed someone to take the fall, and she was the perfect candidate. Flawless. He signals his men to drag her away, and since this was a special situation, he tells them to get creative. Force her to sing, to spill every last detail. A cold dread washes over her as his words sink in. Begging would be pointless now. The goons were already eyeing her like a new chew toy. The next morning, both our boys are sitting in class. Denji is completely passed out after pulling an all-nighter. Our protagonist, on the other hand, is already plotting his next move, calmly checking the progress on that demolition site. The vibe was good, but he knew better than to push his luck and decided to pump the brakes for now. Because soon the demolition would be public knowledge, attracting bigger sharks, a fight he wasn't ready to pick just yet. Since he was sitting on a decent pile of cash, he decided to funnel it into a security firm and scout for people to help him run the show. He was already running through a list of names. But just then, his teacher materialized in front of him, snapping him out of it and demanding the answer to a question, the one he had just explained. Our hero's response, bananas. The teacher just stared, a look of pure disbelief on his face. He was convinced the kid was a complete moron. He went off on him, reminding him he was always ditching class and never paying attention. He warned that if this kept up, he'd completely bomb the entrance exams. But our protagonist was unfazed, doubling down that his answer was 100% correct. The teacher, fed up with his nonsense, finally exploded, yelling that he wouldn't let him tank the class average. So he slapped him with remedial lessons after school. That was the absolute last thing our guy needed. He desperately pointed at Denji, who was dead asleep, asking why he wasn't the one getting chewed out. The teacher told him to just listen. The dude was sleep studying, murmuring complex math equations in his dreams. To make things infinitely worse, our protagonist then overheard that Denji was one of the top students of the entire year. We're talking straight A genius level grades. It finally clicked. He dragged an elite tier student into his chaotic mess the night before. At the end of the day, our hero shuffled out of the classroom, but he still had to face the music at his extra lessons. He walked into the room only to hear someone pipe up that he was late. Annoyed, he just muttered, he was busy. But instead of a lecture, the girl dropped some clever line that went completely over his head. Hearing that voice, he snapped his head around, needing to see if it was who he thought it was. And yup, it was Lingxi. The second he saw her face, his whole vibe shifted. He figured she was in there for tutoring too, but then he found out she was actually the teacher for the course. He was completely floored. He couldn't wrap his head around how a student could suddenly be a teacher at her own school. The explanation was brutally simple. She had the best grades in the entire institute. This revelation made our protagonist seriously question what kind of high-level prodigies he'd been surrounded by this whole time. And the craziest part, her role as his personal tutor was no accident. The moment she heard he'd be in this class, she went straight to the principal. She specifically requested to be the one in charge of teaching him. In that instant, she grabbed him by the tie, letting him know she had orchestrated all of this just for him. Our boy was already on edge, realizing that she had practically been stalking him. But now seeing her make such a bold move, a genuine fear started creeping in. But she had zero plans of letting him go that easily. She yanked on his tie, pulling him even closer. Then she leaned in right next to his ear and began to whisper that, for today, she was in charge, which meant he had to obey her every command. Our protagonist, blushing like crazy, was totally speechless. He didn't have to say a word though, because she immediately switched gears. She pointed out how red his ears were, wondering out loud if he had a fever since his whole body seemed to be radiating heat. This girl was a certified menace. She was savoring every second of torturing this poor guy, even commenting on how she never thought his poker face could crack so spectacularly. Fed up, he scraped together some courage and managed to stammer out that she was here to teach him, so they should get started, asking her to please let go of his tie. But this girl was not done with him, not even close. She just tightened her grip on the fabric. Since he seemed so eager to learn, she decided to make it fun and started spewing absolute nonsense, asking him to calculate something for her. She told him to imagine his body weight was the friction coefficient of her hand pulling his tie was, and the force of his resistance was c. She wanted to know the value of the force she was using to pull him. Not anyone could figure out what the hell this girl had just said. Our hero had to remind her that she was asking this of a failing student who didn't even know basic math, and suggested they start with the absolute basics. Luckily, she didn't cook up some weird punishment and actually agreed, partly because she'd had her fill of messing with him for the day. The scene changes to her writing on the chalkboard. Still, you could tell she was a little let down probably, because our protagonist didn't even try to sneak a peek at her while her back was turned. Since he wasn't going to make a move, she decided she would. With a cheerful tone, she called him to the front to find the domain of the problem she'd written. For him, that was impossible. He didn't even know what a domain was. The girl was totally shocked, asking if he'd been living under a rock his whole life, since he didn't even know the fundamentals of math. Burning with embarrassment, our protagonist looked away, his mind flashing back to the years he'd spent living like a maniac hunting down criminals. To vent her frustration, a move that completely scrambled his brain, but that was a total non-issue for her. In fact, it played right into her hands. It just meant they'd get to spend more time together. Seizing the moment, she slid right up to his desk and swore she'd do whatever it took to help him ace his classes. He was grateful, but he had one unspoken request: that she stop getting so close to his face every chance she got. He was a teenager now, and his body was starting to react in ways he couldn't control. He was terrified of getting embarrassed, but obviously he'd never dare say that out loud. The girl, however, found yet another excuse to invade his personal space. This time she pointed out his long bangs were blocking his view, offering to clip them back for him. It was getting weird even for him. This girl had gone from yanking on his tie to playing with his hair, and who knew what she'd cook up next if he didn't make a run for it. The most terrifying part, our protagonist was actually starting to get scared of her. It was absurd considering he was a trained assassin who'd stared down blades and walked through fire, but this girl's whole vibe was seriously setting him on edge. Finally, the nightmare ended. The protagonist started packing his stuff, trying to bolt, before she could find another excuse for her weird antics. But suddenly, she playfully bumped her shoulder against his, reminding him that he'd better study what she taught him today, or she'd be forced to give him more special lessons. And she definitely wasn't talking about innocent tutoring sessions. A few minutes later, they both left the school. Lynx tried to start a conversation, but our protagonist completely stonewalled her. Seeing his cold shoulder, she asked if he hated her for some reason, or if he just disliked having her around. He made it clear that wasn't the case, which prompted her to ask if he really didn't despise her. With that confirmation, She said there was something she needed to tell him, and she cut right to the chase. She confessed her feelings. The protagonist's mind went blank for a second. Then he broke into a cold sweat as her words hit him. The dense guy couldn't figure out how he'd missed it. Even though she'd been throwing signals at him for ages, his brain just couldn't compute. He just stared at her as the young woman poured her heart out, explaining that's why she'd been so desperately trying to get his attention. She knew it was childish, but she didn't care. She demanded an answer, asking if he felt anything for her at all. The protagonist saw the raw honesty on her face and realized this was the first time in his entire life anyone had ever confessed to him like this. He had no idea how to respond. In the end, he chose to be blunt. He thought she was a good person, but they were walking completely different paths, and he refused to drag her down with him. After that, he turned and started to walk away while the girl completely misunderstood his words, thinking he meant he'd mess up her grades, telling him not to worry about that. Elsewhere in the city, inside a massive mansion, a man was talking with someone, his disappointment crystal clear. He'd been failed. This disappointed man was none other than the same VIP who had been utterly humiliated by our protagonist not too long ago. Chen Jinghu, who was standing next to a strange blonde guy known as Master Chen. The man was seething. They had let the protagonist snatch that bar and the nearby buildings right out from under them. And to top it all off, he, Chen Jinghu, had been bodied by that same high school kid. He tried to explain that the protagonist was a demon in a human's body, but the blonde man wasn't hearing any excuses, and made it known that results were the only thing that mattered to him. He also reminded him just how valuable those buildings were, since they had plans to use them for storing important and most likely illegal things. Then he asked if he had any clue what would happen if his father found out about this mess. Terrified, the man dropped to his knees in front of the blonde, begging for another chance, and promising he would find a way to get those buildings back. Luckily for him, the blonde decided to keep this disaster from his father for now, and gave him one more shot, but he made one thing perfectly clear. The next time he showed up with more excuses, that spot on the floor would be stained with his brain matter, instead of the wine he'd spilled earlier. After dropping that threat, he ordered him to get lost before he changed his mind, and strangled him right then and there. Once the blonde man was alone, he started piecing the situation together. Some strange kid named Jansen had popped up out of nowhere, and for no apparent reason, decided to go against the Chen family. This was starting to pique his interest. Outside, Chen Jinghu dragged his beaten body toward the car, unleashing all the frustration. From the verbal beatdown he just got from the blonde onto the two poor guys helping him, the one in the back was getting the worst of it, because on top of carrying the injured man, he had to endure his screaming warning him not to drop his shoe. According to him, that single shoe was worth more than the man's entire life because it was a limited edition, but none of them knew that shoe was anything but ordinary. There was something hidden on the bottom, and that something was broadcasting their entire conversation, straight to our protagonist who was in his room catching every single word. At first, all he could make out was some guy screaming his head off, but then a familiar name sliced through the conversation, Master Chen. The very same man responsible for his death in his past life, and apparently this monster had given out some kind of mission that seemed to have his name written all over it. This sent a jolt of fury through the kid, confirming his deepest fear that man was in this world too. Seething with rage, he stormed towards the door, ready to settle this blood debt for good. But he froze just before stepping out, realizing he was acting on pure impulse. That man wielded immense influence. Just getting near him wouldn't be easy. Besides, a simple death was far too merciful. He wanted to make him suffer before kicking him straight down to hell. Thinking with a cooler head, he took a deep breath, forced his body to settle, then returned to his bed, and began masterminding the utter destruction of the entire Chen family. With the cash he had on him, only one play made sense: to forge a new force, one with absolute loyalty to him, because trying to take on an organization that huge by himself was a suicide mission. He was going to need backup. The following day, at the military firing range, our protagonist was just unloading clip after clip into a target that barely resembled a target anymore. It looked more like a victim of his raw frustration. Behind him stood Linzenbon's subordinate, Captain Hichan-san, and his own underling. The captain was floored. Our protagonist could shoot better than the fool standing right beside him. That comment seriously ticked off the other guy, who was fuming that his years of training were being compared to a high schooler. But he wasn't wrong. The target had a single hole drilled dead center in the head. The man couldn't deny it. The protagonist was a natural-born marksman. Still getting shown up by someone with no formal training or experience was infuriating. And as they kept praising the kid, the other guy finally yelled for them to stop with the compliments, claiming that hitting a stationary target with a tuned weapon was no big deal. For some reason, that little jab actually got under our protagonist's skin, so to prove he was legit, he told Hichan-san that maybe it was time to level up the difficulty. And since the loudmouth behind him wouldn't shut up, he decided to humiliate him directly, suggesting he toss a bullet casing into the air so he could try to shoot it down, a direct challenge to his pride. The man had no choice but to accept. Besides, what were the odds some student could actually hit a target that small? In midair, this was the perfect chance to put him in his place. With that, he flicked the casing skyward. The protagonist, without so much as a blink, raised his firearm and fired. To the absolute shock of both men, he actually hit the tiny piece of brass in flight. The guy didn't even have the guts to look them in the eye, just muttering that it had to be luck. An incredible fluke. That started to get on our protagonist's nerves. He told him to do it again, and this time he'd shoot with his eyes closed. But Hee-chan-san intervened, saying he didn't need to shoot blindfolded because he was already convinced the kid was the real deal, with a firearm, so he should just ignore the hater. But the most important question came next. Where did he learn to shoot like that? Our protagonist knew. He'd overplayed his hand and was totally screwed, so he quickly fabricated an excuse claiming he used to shoot balloons at amusement parks. And shockingly, the man bought it. With that crisis averted, the protagonist cut to the chase, telling the captain that he needed his help. After hearing him out, the man agreed to support him so long as it didn't violate his principles. The protagonist explained his plan to build a security company, and he needed help recruiting veterans. His goal was to give them a place where they could apply their skills, earn good money, and maintain their dignity. After all, they had spilled their blood and sweat to protect everyone. He wasn't going to let life drag them down after their service. His second reason was that with this new private force, they could help keep the local peace and clean out some of the corrupt scum hiding within the city. After hearing his speech, the captain smiled. Despite the protagonist's young age, his ideals were surprisingly solid. That's why he decided to help him in any way he could, asking what he needed him to do. The protagonist said he just needed a reliable pipeline of people and a strong recommendation to get the necessary permits. That was no sweat for the captain. As a bonus, he gave him the addresses of several veterans he considered exceptionally capable of demolishing criminals, guys who were just like he used to be, completely unhinged. The man was totally pumped for all of it. The next day, the protagonist arrived at the address of the first recommended veteran. He wanted to talk with him and see if he was the kind of soldier he was after. Upon arriving, he found a rundown, shabby workshop, and inside, a man was fixing a washing machine or something similar. When he tried to talk to him, the man told him to get lost, saying he wasn't taking on any jobs that day. Our guy immediately clarified he wasn't there to fix anything. He'd been sent by Officer Hee-chan-san. That name instantly grabbed the veteran's attention, and man, the guy's biceps were absolutely massive. Seeing the reaction, our protagonist flashed the paper Hee-chan-san had given him, explaining he just needed a few minutes to talk. But for some reason the man shot him down, making it clear he had no time to chat with some high school kid while he was busy. He told him to come back if he had something to get fixed. The irony was thick because fixing the man's current situation was exactly why he was there. The veteran was confused, so our protagonist gestured around the trashed workshop, pointing out that the guy was obviously struggling with money, and he just might have the perfect solution if the vet was willing to hear him out. The man, figuring our protagonist was just some punk looking for trouble, squared up to teach him a harsh lesson for wasting his time. But our protagonist didn't even flinch, telling him he wasn't there to mess with him. He cut straight to the chase, telling the man he wanted to pay him well in exchange for his loyalty. The veteran was still skeptical. Money and loyalty were the last things he expected to hear from a kid dressed like that. But to amuse himself, he agreed to listen on one condition. Before they talked, our protagonist had to prove he was worth being loyal to. Our protagonist was thrilled to accept. After all, a ferocious beast can only be controlled with a whip, though the way he said it seriously ticked off the veteran. Since it was a duel to test strength, the man chose the most powerful weapon at his disposal, a pair of chopsticks lying on the ground. And shockingly, the kid wasn't fazed at all, even striking a confident pose as he picked them up. With both of them ready, the veteran laid out the rules. The first one to drop their chopstick loses. Our protagonist had no objections and made it clear the guy shouldn't hold back just because he's a student. In a flash, they both launched themselves at each other like madmen. Our protagonist, aiming for a quick finish, leaped up to attack from above, but instead of backing away, the veteran blocked the strike with his own chopstick. It was incredible that the flimsy stick didn't shatter on contact. The veteran was impressed by the protagonist's strength, but as he admired it, he dropped his guard. Our protagonist seized the opening, firing off a kick toward the veteran's exposed side. Even so, the man was quicker than he looked and managed to dodge at the very last second. The fight continued, and our protagonist started taunting him, saying he wanted to see if the guy was as good at attacking as he was at blocking. The man gladly accepted the challenge and decided to show him just how skilled he was on offense. He charged at our protagonist, and using his full strength, tried to jab the chopstick into his eyes, but our protagonist skillfully dodged every single attempt. He then saw another opening in the veteran's stance and launched another kick, this time aimed at the man's hand. He managed to knock the chopstick loose, but instead of falling, it went flying like a projectile. Just then, a little boy, apparently the veteran's younger brother, appeared, standing exactly in the chopstick's trajectory. The veteran froze in terror, but just before the projectile could hit the child, our protagonist appeared in a blur and snatched the chopstick out of the air. After that, the kid, instead of thanking him, ran excitedly to his older brother asking if he saw how fast he moved. And that was a problem for the veteran because not only had he lost the duel, but now he owed the kid a major debt, which meant he had no choice but to become our hero's right-hand man from that moment forward. And the look on our protagonist's face made it clear. He was savoring the fact that he'd just put this muscle-bound brute in his place. But as he walked into the house, he scanned the interior and noticed the place was littered with medicine. He heard the man clarify that the meds weren't for him but for his younger brother. He also tried to claim that the duel ended in a draw because he got distracted when his brother showed up out of nowhere. After getting that off his chest, the man conceded that he understood how this all worked. He was indebted to the protagonist, and his life now belonged to him. So he asked what he was expected to do. Our hero assured him he wasn't planning on ordering any hits or arsons. That was a complete lie, of course, because he was almost certain to get tangled up in that exact kind of trouble with all the people he'd been ticking off. But that didn't matter. According to him, the only thing he wanted was help forming a company. The protagonist explained that he was building a crew of strong and loyal people, individuals capable of staring death down without flinching and pushing forward. The muscle-bound man would be his sword, the one to lead and train this team. The protagonist glanced at a photo of Bai Pink's group, the muscular man's old squad taken when he was discharged from the service, and he pointed out that in the picture, he looked full of hope and energy, a stark contrast to the exhausted hollow version of himself standing there now. And so the man started to unpack his gut-wrenching story. After finishing his tour in the military, he returned, determined to carve out a decent life for himself. But after chasing down deadbeats on construction sites time and time again, every ounce of his hope was pulverized. It was all thanks to the suits at the top, the ones who couldn't care less if people like him lived or died. But whatever. He told the protagonist to just forget all that it was all in the past now, and invited him to sit, calling him boss. Our hero, however, asked him to just use his name and then prepared to unveil his entire master plan. He launched into the big speech he had just cooked up, inspired by the man's own history. He explained that the very people he had put his life on the line for turned out to be absolute trash who stomped all over his dignity. He then asked if he was really going to let them get away with everything they did to him and his family. Bai Peng was completely lost, not quite getting what our protagonist was driving at, so he asked for a breakdown. Our hero pointed out that Bai Peng wasn't the only one. Countless veterans just like him were suffering at the hands of the exact same people, and his goal was to help as many of them as he possibly could. The plan was simple on the surface: round up their veteran brothers and take on legitimate security and escort jobs to guarantee everyone a stable life. But that was just the public face of the operation. In reality, they would use that facade to forge a force powerful enough to finally confront the bastards who were abusing their power and hurting citizens and guys like them. The man actually let out a small chuckle after hearing the whole pitch. He could see that the protagonist had thought of everything and vowed to follow him to the very end. He just had to name the place, and he'd be there, no questions asked. Later, our hero is seen walking back home. It was then that he sensed a presence nearby. He whipped around to see who it was, and sure enough, someone was tailing him from a short distance away. Once spotted, the person tried to duck back into hiding, but it was too late. The protagonist wondered if maybe it was a goon sent by Chen Jinghu. But as he called out to the shadow, he saw it was Lingxi, peeking her head out from around a corner. Shocked, he wondered what on earth she was doing in a place like this at this hour, and if she'd been following him. And yes, the girl had been watching him for a while, but she had her own justification ready. She argued that she was his tutor now, which meant he was her responsibility, especially if he was skipping his classes. That's why she had followed him ever since school let out to see what he was up to. And more importantly, she couldn't just let someone she considered special wander around the city without telling her. She never said the words, future husband, but you know that's what she was thinking. Our hero tried to get the girl to stop worrying about him, reminding her of what he'd told her before. The business he was handling was not safe, and he didn't want to drag her into any of his problems. But as he was yelling at her, he failed to notice a car barreling straight towards him at full speed. By the time they both realized, it was too late to get out of the way. To make matters 1,000 times worse, he saw the girl dash towards the car's path, instead of away from it. Seeing her do this, the protagonist froze, completely unable to move a single muscle, just as the car was about to flatten them both. The girl shoved the protagonist out of the way as they both tumbled to the pavement. He scrambled up to check on her, and thankfully she only had a few scrapes. Other than that, she seemed okay and insisted that she was in no danger, as long as she was near him. In that instant, several thugs leaped out of the car, wielding machetes, completely shattering the emotional moment. Seeing the situation escalate, our protagonist stepped in front of the girl to shield her as he faced down these idiots. In a flash, all the goons charged him. With their weapons raised, the protagonist was absurdly fast and began to dismantle them one by one with his fists. even landing in a brutal uppercut to some bald guy's jaw. These thugs were a joke. None of them could even get close to him. But in the middle of all the chaos, one of the goons managed to get behind the protagonist and was about to slice him into ribbons. However, something shot out from an unknown location and smacked the blade directly, sending it flying from his hands. Even the bald dude was paralyzed when he saw that. Another one of the clowns told him to look at the blade, and when he turned, he saw a bullet embedded in the metal. As they tried to figure out who could have done that, they heard a voice ring out from one of the buildings. Turning, they saw a couple of guys warning them not to wave those weapons around in front of Miss Chen. The leader of the newcomers gave them a clear ultimatum. Crouching down, he revealed a pistol and made it plain that they had only two choices: get lost or get dead. In a dimly lit hospital corridor, Jansen weighted his body heavy with exhaustion and worry. A painful memory flashed in his mind, the image of Lingxi's injured and vulnerable eye. His hand tightened into a fist, trembling with a rage he could barely contain. And in the silence, he swore a brutal oath to make whoever did this to her pay 100 times over. The sound of a door cracking open shattered his dark thoughts as a nurse stepped into the corridor. Jiansan shot to his feet and raced towards her, desperate for an update on Lingxi's condition. The nurse assured him the wounds were only skin deep and that she just needed to stay for observation. Then she asked if he was a relative since they needed to complete the admission paperwork. The question caught Jiansan completely off guard. He lowered his head and quietly admitted he was just her classmate. In the clean, quiet hallway, Jiansan watched as two men approached. He steeled his resolve, thinking, "I am her family." All at once, an older man materialized in front of him, and Jiansan recognized him with a jolt of shock. It was Lin Seiban. Our protagonist immediately started to apologize, but Lin Seiban just raised a hand to silence him, and Jiansan stood there frozen. The scene cuts to the hospital room, where Lingxi lay in bed with her arm bandaged. She was holding her father's hand, the very same Uncle Lin Seiban from the hallway, and telling him she was fine. She insisted that her injuries were minor, and that she'd only fallen by accident while protecting Jiansan. Her father just sighed, his face etched with worry. After apologizing again, Lingxi's curiosity kicked in. She demanded to know who the armed men were that saved her from those thugs, asking if they were part of her father's unit. Lin Saban's gaze grew heavy as he revealed they were family. Utterly confused, Lingxi had no idea what he was talking about. As Jiansan listened from the doorway, Lin Saban stepped in to reassure her, promising that he would take care of this complicated situation. In that moment, however, Jiansan understood the rumors were all true. The Lin family was on a whole other level of powerful. Lingxi's dad told her to get some rest and promised he'd be back to see her tomorrow. Once they were outside the room, Jiansan bowed his head and apologized to Uncle Lin for failing to protect his daughter. Before he could even finish, Lin Saban cut him off, snapping that apologies were worthless. Right now, Jiansan desperately insisted that everything was his fault. Lin Saban clamped a hand on his shoulder, a grim smile twisting his lips. He told him that if he was truly sorry, he needed to go out and break the legs of the scumbags who dared to harm his daughter. A cold fire ignited in Jiansan's eyes as he met the man's gaze. He accepted the mission, vowing they wouldn't escape as he turned to leave. Lin Saban warned him to make good on his promise. Jiansan simply told him to trust him. Lin Saban shot back that he could trust him 1,000 times. But he only had one daughter, and she couldn't survive being put in endless danger. He then told him to get back home, before his own parents got worried. Left alone in the hallway, the crushing weight of those words slammed down on Jiansan. Elsewhere, a subordinate was reporting to young Master Chen that the warning had been delivered, just as he'd commanded. With a hint of hesitation, he added that the young lady of the Lin family had sustained minor injuries during the clash. Over an intercom, Chen Jinghu just laughed it off, saying she got lucky, and that the incident was a perfect way to test her old man's reaction. Meanwhile, Jiansan, lying in his own bed, was secretly listening to the entire exchange through a hidden earpiece. Chen Jinghu sneered at the thought of Jiansan seeing him as a lucky grasshopper whose time was about to run out. From his room, Jiansan smirked at the Chen family's unbelievable arrogance, totally oblivious that he was being watched. Chen Jinghu then revealed his master plan. The whole demolition project was just a smokescreen to create a massive network and seize control of every business in the entire city. The district's old crumbling buildings were the key to moving his illegal goods. As he heard this, Jiansan shot bolt upright in bed, his face like stone. He finally understood this was way bigger and darker than a simple turf war. Clenching his fist, he made a new vow. He had just found the place where Chen Jinghu would die. Chen Jinghu gave his final command: keep Jiansan under surveillance and wait for the goods to arrive. Then they would eliminate everyone in one single move. Jiansan's eyes narrowed with deadly focus. He knew the clock was ticking and he had to gather enough power to crush Chen Jinghu before that twisted scheme ever came to life. The very next day, Bai Peng reported to his new boss, Jiansan, that the first wave of recruits was here. He presented the battle-hardened men, To their new and shockingly young leader, Jiansan thanked Bai Peng, then welcomed the men to Long Yun's security, calling them his new brothers in arms. But before he could say another word, a huge, brawny guy interrupted him, looking him up and down with total disbelief. He bluntly challenged Jiansan's age, asking if they'd been hired for some chump change bodyguard job. The other recruits instantly started murmuring their agreement, the air thick with doubt. Bai Peng tried to get them to settle down as the grumbling grew louder. Completely unfazed, Jiangshan pulled everyone's focus toward a massive training ground, laying out the deal that, before taking on any post, they first had to conquer the course laid out before them. Another dude scoffed at the sight of the obstacle course, flexing about his past military cred. He got right in Jiangshan's face, completely offended at the idea that his skills were even being questioned. Jiangshan calmly explained the training's real purpose to protect clients and themselves, all while staying within the law. Then he announced he was about to smoke the entire course in a flash. Jiangshan expertly slapped a pistol together, gave Bai Peng the nod to start the timer, and poised himself for the signal. Jiangshan exploded into motion. Bai Peng started shouting out the seconds. He blitzed through the obstacle course with insane speed and agility, vaulting, sliding, and clearing every barrier flawlessly. Bai Peng kept his eyes glued to the stopwatch, as the rest of the crew just watched in total disbelief. The seconds ticked by, but Jiangshan showed zero signs of slowing down. The guy from before couldn't process what he was seeing, admitting that Jiangshan was on a whole other level as he completed the entire course. Jiangshan raised the weapon and fired, nailing a perfect bullseye on the target. Bai Peng smashed the stopwatch button. The timer read an unbelievable 57 seconds, with the final record clocking in at 58 seconds. A single paintball was splattered dead center on the target. When the dust settled, Bai Peng and the others just stared, completely shell-shocked. The man in the black shirt was still tripping, nodding and admitting the course wasn't short no matter how it looked. He had to remind himself that he'd already acknowledged Jiangshan's explosive power was impressive, but he was still skeptical, pointing out that the kid looked like he belonged in high school. Jiangshan stepped forward and confirmed it. Yep, just a student. He scanned the group of hardened soldiers with a confident smirk, pistol still in hand. He laid down the gauntlet, making it clear that at the bare minimum, they had to be faster than him. Otherwise, he wouldn't feel right sending them out on a live mission. The men, led by the buff dude in the black shirt, started getting visibly irritated. Jiangshan straight up questioned their professionalism, claiming that if they couldn't even protect themselves, they had no hope of protecting a client. Triggered by what he saw as pure arrogance, the man snapped and rallied the other guys, swearing he'd show their new boss what a real soldier was made of. The men roared in agreement, hyped up and ready to prove themselves. With his crew assembled, Jiangshan's expression turned to ice. He thought about his true target, Chenju, and made a silent vow to personally demolish his entire network and all his ambitions. Over at a local apartment complex, the quiet was shattered by the sharp, repeated sound of a doorbell. A woman cracked open her door to find Bai Peng and Jiangshan, who were rocking deceptively friendly smiles. Bai Peng claimed they were recruiting for a new security firm, but he quickly pivoted the conversation to the neighborhood's public safety, listing off common issues like protection rackets and thefts. He watched the woman's reaction like a hawk, and suddenly, his friendly act vanished, his expression hardening as he dropped the one question that mattered. Had anyone gone missing? A cold sweat slicked the woman's face as raw panic flashed in her eyes. She denied everything, shouting that they were fine before slamming the door right in their faces. Bai Peng and Jiangshan were left in the hallway, staring at the shut door in a heavy, awkward silence. The rest of the investigation completely stalled out as neighbors would either dodge their gaze or sharply change the subject anytime they tried to ask questions. Even a casual game of chess got super tense the second Bai Peng mentioned the word disappeared, making the air feel thick and oppressive. Taking a break on a stairwell, Bai Peng pointed out the obvious fear hanging over the residents while casually munching on some flatbread. Jiangshan agreed, but then he cut to the chase, demanding to know what they were really investigating. For a second, Bai Peng's laid-back vibe completely vanished when Jiangshan revealed he was looking into the Chen family. Bai Peng froze, solid, pure terror washing over him as he realized his boss intended to go head-to-head with the most ruthless local tyrants in all of Jiangshan City. Jiangshan explained that his intel came straight from the bureau chief, completely brushing off the weight of his high-level connections. He added that despite the mounting pressure on the chief, nearly a dozen missing persons cases in the old city had all hit a dead end, and he suspected the Chen family's dirty dealings were the root cause. Bai Peng started sweating bullets, warning him that going after the Chen family was like sticking his hand in a viper's nest. Before the warning could even sink in, a shout ripped through the air from down below. The Hornets had arrived, a crew of local thugs. They stormed down the street, furious that two strangers had been creeping around their turf asking about missing people. Bai Peng knew instantly their cover was blown. But instead of panicking, Jian-san just calmly asked if his partner was done with lunch yet. Hearing that Bai Peng was full, Jian-san hinted that it was time for a little exercise. The crew's leader stepped up, threatening them both for daring to waltz through his zone. Showing zero respect, Bai Peng tensed up, rage about to boil over, but Jian-san placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. Stepping forward with a condescending smirk, Jian-san clowned on the thugs, calling them nothing but pathetic maggots, squirming for attention. The insult hit a nerve, and the leader screamed for his boys, the self-proclaimed 4 dragons of Old Street, to get them. A massive goon charged forward, head down, screaming the name of his supposed ultimate technique, human bowling. Bai Peng stopped the giant dead in his tracks with a single palm to the face. Effortlessly, completely unfazed, he looked down on him, genuinely baffled that such a pathetic move even had a name. Then he slammed the huge guy into the pavement with a brutal crack, mocking the failed attack as a trash-tier gutter ball. The crew's morale shattered at the raw display of power, but a man called Brother Scar stepped forward and ordered his men to handle the muscle, while he claimed Jian-san for himself. One of the lackeys questioned why the boss was picking the scrawny-looking student, earning a harsh smackdown for his backtalk. Jian-san grinned, amused that they were still mistaking his chill vibe for weakness. With a fearless smile, he baited the veteran to take his best shot. Brother Scar absolutely erupted, lunging forward with pure killing intent. Jian-san's smile vanished, instantly replaced by a bone-chilling coldness. He unleashed a devastating counter, his fist connecting with explosive force, caving in the thug's face. The impact launched the man airborne, his body flailing like a rag doll. Before gravity took over, he smashed into the ground with a sickening, bone-shattering crunch, landing right in the middle of the fight and sparking horrified screams from his allies. Jian-san turned his gaze to the last 2 thugs, his quiet calm freezing them in place. Standing next to Bai Peng, he warned them with an icy tone not to get cocky about their own strength when facing them. He ordered them to grab their unconscious friends and get the hell out of his sight. Immediately, dripping sweat, realizing they stood zero chance, the thugs scrambled to agree and hauled the bodies away. When the dust settled, Bai Peng shot Jian-san, a look confused why he'd let the enemies just walk when they could have been interrogated. Jian-san started to walk off, casually asking if Bai Peng had ever been fishing. Patience, he explained, is everything, and yanking the line too soon just spooks the catch. A dangerous glint in his red eyes revealed his true strategy. Sometimes it's better to let one fish swim free, so it can lead you to the entire school. A few minutes after the brawl, Jian-san spotted the scarred survivor slinking away and gave the signal to tail him. The target said goodbye to his buddy, totally clueless that he was being followed. Wincing in pain, the man limped off alone, leaving the residential block behind and ducking into a side alley. Bai Peng was sketched out by the detour, but Jian-san knew this shady behavior was exactly what they were looking for. They tracked the man through a field of rubble. Jian-san and Bai Peng ducked behind a wall, watching as their prey met up with a black truck. A guy in a blue shirt came out to meet him, and the thug immediately jumped into the vehicle. Staying low behind the cracked stone wall, they both locked their eyes on the action at the back of the truck. And then, a grim reality slammed into them. Peering into the darkness, they saw a large sack on the ground, twitching violently as the person inside fought to get out. Muffled screams for help leaked from the bag, but the blue-shirted man just stood over his captive in dead silence. The muffled cries cut through the dark air as 2 men struggled to move, a heavy object that wouldn't stop thrashing. Jian-san and Bai Peng were crouched low behind a wall, their eyes glued to the suspicious sack, writhing on the ground. It clicked instantly. Someone was tied up in there. Bai Peng's jaw went slack, absolutely livid at the blatant kidnapping happening right in front of them. The goons hoisted the victim over their shoulders and started to move out. Not knowing the play, Bai Peng looked at Jian-san, nervously suggesting they call the cops instead of diving in headfirst. And in that moment, they both stepped out of the shadows. Screaming they were the police to paralyze the kidnappers, the unexpected shout triggered instant panic in the 2 criminals who were convinced the authorities had tracked them to this deserted wasteland. As they scrambled to escape with the hostage, the spiky-haired thug froze, realizing the voices sounded way too familiar. He spun around and immediately recognized Jiang-san and Bai Peng, realizing they weren't cops at all. They were the same dudes who had wrecked his crew before. He relaxed, thinking they were just a couple of security guards. The criminals whipped out their knives, confident they could carve up 2 meddling civilians. Jiang-san answered their arrogance with immediate crushing violence. The thugs understood far too late that titles are meaningless when Jiang-san and Bai Peng descended upon them with brutal force. The man in the light-colored shirt yelled to his partner that these were the guys, the very same monsters who had completely annihilated the so-called 4 dragons of Old Street earlier that day. Even knowing he was totally outmatched, desperation drove him to lunge with the knife anyway. Jiang-san snatched the blade out of the air with zero effort and locked onto the attacker's wrist with an iron grip. Cold sweat drenched the criminal's face as he stared into Jiang-san's eyes and felt the immense, terrifying gap in their power. The showdown ended with a single punch, straight to the jaw that sent him flying. His body bounced off the pavement before skidding to a dead stop. The one they called Brother Scar watched in pure horror as his partner lay unconscious, screaming that he had warned him about how strong these men were. Shaking with fear, he tried to justify himself, claiming he did everything he could to dodge this fight. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder, freezing him in place. Bai Peng was standing right behind him, saying his name, with a mocking tone and leaning in with a dark question. His grip tightened, crushing any hope of escape. With a dangerous smirk, Bai Peng brought up the so-called Jianghu Code about sharing both blessings and disasters, taunting the tough guy act the thug had been putting on just moments before. Fear sent a river of cold sweat down Scar's spine, as Bai Peng commented, in an almost playful tone, that they'd shared enough disasters for one day, pretending he'd forgotten something. Bai Peng decided to cut the chat short and knocked him out with one swift blow. With both criminals down for the count, Jiang San shifted his focus to the sack that was still desperately squirming. He knelt down and reassured the captive inside that they were safe now, as he quickly undid the knots. When he ripped open the bag, he was completely stunned. His eyes shot wide as he recognized the face in front of him. He couldn't believe it. It was an old acquaintance. Jiang San whispered the name Jiang Tianli, staring at the bound and gagged man, who he hadn't seen in years. Tears streamed down Jiang Tianli's face as he looked at his savior, overwhelmed with relief and shame. Jiang San demanded to know how he had ended up in such a miserable state. Back at the police station, an officer explained that the former young master's family had fallen from grace after several arrests, followed by eviction, and eventually homelessness. He added that Jiang Tianli had nearly been kidnapped a second time just before the rescue. Jiang San changed the subject, demanding information on Brother Scar and his crew. The officer reported they were just hired muscle, but the interrogation had revealed a crucial piece of intel. The human cargo was headed for the Zhongfen warehouse district. Jiang San's eyes turned to ice as he instantly connected that place to the Chen family. The officer confirmed that the warehouse belonged to them, even though it operated as a legitimate business on the surface. Jiang San knew they couldn't move against the Chen family without rock-solid evidence. He then followed the official into Director Dong's private office to discuss the case in greater detail. A map was spread out on the desk, and he drew the director's attention to the layout of the city's old district. He traced a direct line to the Zhongfen warehouse and pointed out an abandoned railway that connected the 2 points. He realized the gang was exploiting the chaos of the demolition zone and the old infrastructure to forge a secret transportation channel. Certain of his deduction, Jiang San told Director Dong to request a search warrant immediately. The director hesitated, wiping sweat from his brow, while muttering that the situation wasn't so simple. He revealed that someone high up had ordered him to be extremely cautious with any cases involving the Chen family. He turned away, letting out a heavy sigh from the pressure he was under. Jiang San watched him with a cold stare, wondering if some big shot was actually protecting this family, or if the crafty old fox was just playing weak. The director nervously brought up the demolition in the old district, hinting that complicated interests were involved. Jiang San understood instantly and leaned in with a calculating smile, insinuating how much money Dong must have already received for that project. Dong sweated even more and tried to defend his reputation to dodge the accusation. Jiang San walked right past the flustered official. He urged him to look at the bigger picture, pointing out that with the Chen family wiped off the map, the payday from future demolitions would be legendary. He slammed his hand on the map, laying down his terms. That entire pie, he declared, belonged to them, and they'd be the ones deciding how to slice it. He spelled it out: the Chen family was a knife to their throats, cutting them off from the real money. He then challenged him, was he really going to settle for table scraps when he could take the whole feast? The question rocked the director, leaving him visibly shaken. Jian San roared at him, demanding to know if he had the guts to go all in just once in his damn life. Don gritted his teeth, a dangerous glint of ambition igniting in his eyes as he wrestled with the monumental decision. He finally snapped, shouting to hell with it all, and casting his hesitation aside. He tried to claim he was doing it for some supposed benefactor, but he immediately pivoted, proclaiming this was for justice and the missing residents. He struck a defiant pose, vowing he would not tolerate this evil any longer. Jian San watched this sudden 180 with a sly smirk and offered to handle any heat that might come down from the top brass. A quiet chuckle escaped Jian San. He was thrilled to hear the director spouting the exact lines he needed him to. Now that the director was on board, Jian San held out his hand, demanding the one thing he required to proceed: the official document green-lighting his collaboration with the police investigation. When Director Don paused for a fraction of a second, Jian San's eyes narrowed, questioning if the man was already thinking of bailing on their agreement, the one they had just made. Don flinched as panic surged through him, clutching his head. He quickly backpedaled, swearing he wasn't backing out and had just been slow on the uptake. He forced a nervous laugh to cut the tension, but the smile died on his lips as he tacked on a somber warning. With a grim expression, Director Don slammed the official seal onto the authorization form. Once the paperwork was done, he passed the document to Jian-san, warning him that the Chen family were dangerous people, the kind of people you really don't want to mess with. Jian-san calmly accepted the order, brushing off the cautionary words. A hard glint in his eyes made it crystal clear he wasn't exactly a pushover himself. The scene cuts to John Feng's heavily fortified warehouse, where security cameras blanketed every angle, leaving zero blind spots. Guards kept constant watch behind towering walls, crowned with electrified barbed wire. Hidden in the tall grass, Jian-san was scoping out the perimeter through a pair of binoculars. As Bai Peng analyzed the fortifications, they both realized that a direct assault was impossible without alerting the entire compound. Jian-san scanned the map and found there in a weak spot, where overgrown tree branches were interfering with the electric fence. He ordered the team to breach from that point and kill the power to the surveillance grid. Then he gave Bai Peng the signal and led him down a separate route right into the facility's drainage system. He gestured toward a set of rusted iron bars blocking the tunnel, indicating that this would be their point of entry. With the plan locked in, he gave the order to move out. Jian-san and Bai Peng melted into the night, racing toward the warehouse grounds. They landed without a sound, having successfully infiltrated the Chen family's fortress. They made it to the drainage entrance where a thick, chained grate blocked their path. Bai Peng snapped the lock with a pair of bolt cutters. The metal gate groaned open. Jian-san slipped into the damp blackness of the tunnel first. Bai Peng followed close behind as Jian-san lit their path with a flashlight. Suddenly, his instincts flared. He signaled that he sensed movement directly above them, a tension that Bai Peng missed. An incredibly loud yawn echoed down from the surface. A man stretched his arms wide, complaining to his partner about how exhausted he was. One man whispered to the other to keep it down, worried about being caught on camera. The veteran guard just waved him off. He confidently explained that they were in a perfect surveillance blind spot, hunkered down behind some cover. Bai Peng muttered that the place felt like a ghost town, wondering who they were even hiding from. At that exact moment, the two guards were casually walking along, talking about sneaking out to an internet cafe. Before they could finish the thought, Jian-san moved like a blur, striking the nearest man in the neck with a single precise chop. The guard crumpled unconscious before he hit the ground. A moment later, Jian-san and Bai Peng emerged, now disguised in the stolen uniforms. They blended in seamlessly. Jian-san adjusted his disguise and shot his partner a look, reminding him to stay sharp. Bai Peng gave a firm nod, his relaxed demeanor vanishing as he snapped into professional mode. As they moved deeper inside, Jian-san peered through an observation window, and his pupils contracted in shock. What he witnessed obliterated any notion that this was an ordinary business. The walls were lined with rows of rusted cages, each one. Gaunt prisoners stared into nothingness while in a room nearby, men in white coats performed twisted experiments on a restrained victim, prying their eyes wide open. They laughed with a chilling clinical detachment, examining the person like they were nothing more than a lab rat. Johnson instantly knew this place was far more than just some warehouse. Long corridors, bathed in a cold blue light, were patrolled by doctors who walked around with a terrifyingly casual air. Jian-san and Bai Peng froze in the hallway, struggling to process the sheer scale of the atrocity. Bai Peng trembled with rage, sweat plastering his forehead as the gravity of the Chen family's crimes crashed down on him. He gritted his teeth, wondering if they had just stumbled into a concentration camp or a massive human trafficking ring. Jian-san's expression hardened as he connected the dots. He realized this operation was way beyond simple kidnappings for ransom money. In a low, heavy voice, he explained this wasn't just trafficking, it was about biological compatibility. The technical term left Bai Peng confused and terrified. Sweat trickled down his scarred cheek as he demanded a straight answer. Jian-san delivered the chilling verdict: it was compatibility for organ transplants. The nightmare unfolded right before them as a masked surgeon and his assistant prepped a terrified captive, drawing blood to assess their biological value, as if they were just a spare part. Jian-san confirmed it: the Chen family's real empire was built on harvesting human organs. He glanced toward the rusted cells, where men and women gripped the bars in silence. They weren't just prisoners, they were livestock waiting to be butchered. A righteous fury surged through Bai Peng. Unable to stomach the horror any longer, he braced himself to storm the room. Jian-san grabbed his arm, urging caution. He pulled out his phone, putting the mission before his own rage. Through the crack in the door, he recorded every second of the procedure, capturing the undeniable proof they needed to legally obliterate the Chen family. With the recording saved, it was go time. Jian-san gave the signal, and they both unleashed their pent-up force. They shattered the door with a single kick, exploding into the room. The thunderous crash plunged the lab into chaos. The white-coated researchers screamed, panicking, as they realized their secret operation had been blown wide open. The lead scientist started barking orders, prioritizing his research over his own safety. He commanded his subordinates to secure the data, while he tried to handle the intruders. Jian-san reacted instantly, yelling at Bai Peng to round up every last person in a lab coat before they could shred the evidence. Bai Peng didn't hesitate, diving straight into the fray. A scientist tried to bolt with a handful of documents, but Bai Peng intercepted him before he could get 2 steps. In that split second, a guard burst from a blind spot, swinging a steel pipe to force him back. Bai Peng didn't even flinch, fixing the guard with an ice-cold glare. Jian-san launched a high kick that sent another guard flying through the air, following up with a crushing downward strike that slammed him into the floor. More guards swarmed in to surround them, but Bai Peng just clicked his tongue in annoyance. Suddenly his eyes widened at what he saw, and he screamed Jian-san's name. But the lead researcher was ignoring them, frantically feeding documents into a shredder to wipe the data clean. Jian-san knew they had to secure that evidence before it all vanished. The guards swarmed like cockroaches, blocking their path with sheer numbers to buy time as the papers were destroyed. Jian-san ordered Bai Peng to hold off the men while he recovered the data, but then desperate screams echoed from the cells, stopping him dead in his tracks. The prisoners were clinging to the bars, begging for help, absolutely terrified of dying in this dark hole. Looking at their faces, Jian-san made a critical decision. He yelled at Bai Peng to forget the data and focus everything on rescuing the hostages. Bai Peng obeyed instantly, smashing a heavy fist into a guard's face. Jian-san unleashed his full power, determined to get every single person out of there alive. Later at the station, after the dust had settled and all the hostages were safe, Johnson officially handed the cleanup operation over to Director Don. The director puffed out his chest, accepting the responsibility, as if it were his sacred duty. But Johnson still had one last ace up his sleeve. He slid a black hard drive across the desk, instantly grabbing Don's full attention. He revealed that the device contained direct evidence recovered from the warehouse district. It was all their footage of the imprisonment, the illegal medical procedures, and even video of the Chen family destroying documents during the raid. Director Don stared silently at the device, understanding he was holding the weapon that could bring down the entire Chen family. He felt the crushing weight of the moment, realizing the sheer scale of the war they had just started. He turned to warn Jian-san that he'd basically punched a hole in the heavens, and the Chen family wasn't about to let that kind of disrespect go unpunished. Ian San, however, was cool as a cucumber, cracking a confident smile and hinting that maybe the director was getting scared again. Don bristled at the jab, insisting he was being cautious, not cowardly. He slammed his hand on the desk, declaring that the arrow was already notched. It had to be fired. There was no turning back now. He let out a long sigh, his eyes scanning the cityscape outside the window. His expression was stone cold, knowing that this next move was his one and only chance to cripple the Chen family. The next morning, a thick blanket of fear still smothered the old district. Residents whispered nervously amongst themselves. They were even scared to go out after dark. Bai Peng strolled past a newsstand and grabbed the morning paper. He felt the suffocating atmosphere and casually asked the elderly woman selling papers if something big had gone down. The old woman burst into tears of joy, explaining that something truly wonderful had occurred. Her son, who had vanished for a month, had walked through their door just yesterday. Bai Peng feigned shock, offering a warm smile and his congratulations as the old woman added that tons of other missing people had also reappeared. Playing the part of a curious bystander, Bai Peng asked how they had all gone missing in the first place. Wiping away her tears, the old woman just pointed to the massive headline on the front page. Bai Peng began to read the paper. The grandmother's emotional words echoed in his head. The headline. It exposed the existence of a horrifying human warehouse and a black market organ trade operating in plain sight in the Zhongfeng district. Elsewhere, a swarm of reporters engulfed Director Don, shoving a forest of microphones. A chaotic swarm of microphones surged toward his face, the press desperate for answers. Don cleared his throat and commanded order completely, basking in the sudden media storm. He puffed out his chest, his whole demeanor shifting to dead serious, and announced the creation of a special task force that he would personally lead, would lead to bring justice to the victims. With a resolute look, he vowed a ruthless investigation into every company involved. One reporter cut straight to the chase, asking about the rumors connecting this whole nightmare to the powerful Chen family. Don didn't even flinch, declaring that it didn't matter who was protecting these criminals, they would all face the law. Flashing a wide grin and a thumbs up, he proclaimed that his team represented absolute justice. The scene then cuts to a quiet residence, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. From inside, a calm voice answered a phone call. Young Master Chen was standing over the battered body of Brother Scar. He spoke with sickening politeness, reassuring some Uncle Liu that the family would handle the mess. When he hung up, the respectful facade vaporized, replaced by a sneer of pure annoyance. His golden eyes narrowed, glowing with a dangerous light. He was processing the news, the warehouse raided, the entertainment city shut down. He stalked toward his fallen underling and mocked him, calling him a completely useless watchdog. Despite the colossal failure, he demanded to know if Scar understood the insane amount of money they had just lost. Without warning, he stomped down hard on Scar's head, grinding his boot into the man's face. The broken man coughed up blood, barely able to whisper the young master's name. From the floor, Chen's rage intensified as the humiliating truth dawned on him. The cops hadn't just gotten lucky. Someone had planted a bug on his own subordinate. A crazed, maniacal laugh erupted from him at the irony that his own dog had led the wolves right to the family's doorstep. Scar, broken and bleeding on the floor, pleaded for mercy. He begged for just one more chance to prove his worth. But suddenly, the manic glee vanished from Chen's face. He sighed, his expression shifting to an unreadable, ice-cold calm. With a wave of his hand, he decided to let it go. He remarked that even a master can get attached to a useless mutt after raising it for so long. Then, turning his back on the groveling subordinate, he stated that his mood was completely ruined. He ordered the man to accompany him for a walk by the river. Relief washed over the veteran goon. Scar scrambled to his feet, thanking him for the order. Completely oblivious to the darkness lurking behind this sudden act of mercy, young Master Chen then gave an order to his men. Clean everything up, make it fast, and make it thorough. His subordinates moved instantly, beginning to erase every trace of the violence. Before leaving, Chen glanced over his shoulder with chilling indifference and gave one final instruction: change the carpet. It's dirty. The men looked down at Scar's body, realizing his loyalty had just been repaid with a death sentence. That supposed walk by the river had a much darker destination. Scar's body was dumped into the stormy waters, ensuring his silence would be eternal. In the howling wind and pouring rain, Chen's men shoved a heavy barrel to the edge of a cliff and heaved it over into the raging sea. The container slammed into the surface and was swallowed by the black depths near the shore. All clear, a subordinate reported, bowing low to young Master Chen, but Chen just let out a massive yawn, completely over the night's tedious work. With a lazy flick of his wrist, he dismissed his men. He then sank into the plush leather of his car's back seat, ready to bounce. He was about to leave the grim scene behind, but the driver hesitated, holding up a screen with a seriously worrying report. Chen glanced at the display, his eyes locking onto the internal security feed from the warehouse. What he saw demanded his full attention. An underling passed him a tablet showing the footage. His focus zeroed in on a lone figure moving through the chaos, a figure he knew instantly. The man who had single-handedly trashed their entire operation. He tapped the screen, jogging his memory for a name. Then it clicked. The name slid from his lips like venom: Jin-san. His face twisted into a mocking sneer. How pretentious. A name that basically meant he wanted to rule the world. His man quickly explained that this Jean-san owned a private security company. And get this, he had deep ties to the police. The report confirmed it. The warehouse assault was a targeted strike organized by his squad. The driver started to ask for orders, but Chen cut him off with a low rumbling chuckle that slowly started to fill the entire car. For Chen, this wasn't a threat, it was high-stakes entertainment. Young Master Chen's body shook with uncontrollable manic laughter. The insane sound bounced off the interior before he abruptly cut it off. A cold, sharp smile plastered on his face. This unexpected resistance was genuinely amusing to him. A sinister violet glow flared in his eyes. Then a crucial realization hit him. Jean-san isn't here. The cops thought they were playing him. In reality, Jean-san had the authorities dancing in the palm of his hand. Chen envisioned his enemy slipping away, his own hand clenching the empty air as if he could crush him from a distance. He declared that no matter what game he was playing, Jean-san's road was about to hit a dead end. He pictured the entire weight of his clan crashing down on the boy like a shadow from the underworld. He accepted this challenge as a raw contest of power, and swore Jin-san would pay for his arrogance in blood. Deep in the black of night, lights blazed in a silent, luxurious villa. A hand dialed a number, the screen's glow illuminating the room. A blond man in a bathrobe answered the call, his face grim. A cold order came from the other end. Find the best cleaner available immediately. Chen Yu paced his room like a caged animal, barking orders into his phone to eliminate Jean-san at any cost. But his words died in his throat as a furious voice cut him off cold. He froze, solid sweat popping on his forehead. Recognizing his third-grade uncle, the old man tore into him with savage words, declaring the family was disgusted. For the absolute catastrophe he had unleashed, Chen Yu listened in dead silence as his punishment was dictated. His position in the line of succession was demoted, and his resources were slashed in half. He tried to protest, his eyes wild with panic. But the elder showed zero mercy, ordering him to stay put and keep a low profile. The call ended with one last threat. Leaving Chen Yu gripping the phone in utter humiliation, the screen went black. Chen Yu just stared at the dead device. As the elder's disrespect burned through his mind, he finally lost control, cursing those ancient fossils who controlled the family. He violently slammed the phone into the floor, breathing hard, and remembered the command to kneel in the ancestral hall. His fists clenched, enraged that his own bloodline was treating him like garbage, and he repeated the insult through a dark laugh, which soon spiraled out of control. He threw his arms wide and screamed Johnson's name, thanking him for the humiliation. With a twisted grin, he accepted his new title as the shame of the family. The scene cuts to an office, where residents were signing demolition agreements. People were lined up to finalize their contracts. Johnson blended into the line, going completely unnoticed. An old man turned, surprised, to see a student getting mixed up in real estate affairs. Burning with curiosity, the neighbor wanted to know how many properties his family had. Jin-san just smiled and held up 3 fingers, letting the man's imagination fill in the blanks. The old man assumed it meant 3 apartments, and he was floored thinking about the massive compensation the kid was about to receive. Johnson was on the verge of correcting the misunderstanding, but he decided to keep his mouth shut. He knew that if he confessed, he actually owned 3 whole buildings, and not just 3 units. The shock might actually give the poor guy a heart attack. When he got to the counter, the clerk handed him the contract for confirmation. Johnson kept up his polite act while the old man continued to gawk at him in amazement. He signed it quickly, and the deal was locked in. Holding the contract, he felt a massive wave of relief. The high-stakes gambit against the Chen family had finally paid off, giving him real security with the signed agreement. Johnson officially launched his security firm, sealing the partnership with a solid handshake with Bai Ping. He threw himself into intense training, ensuring the team's physical prowess lived up to its skyrocketing reputation. Life became a hectic whirlwind of managing the business and brutal combat training. Even so, the university campus remained the only place where Johnson could find any peace. Footsteps echoed across the pavement, and a familiar voice called out his name. Johnson spun around and saw a female classmate, approaching him with a brilliant smile. She was in awe of his ability to run a company and study at the same time. Impressed that he'd cracked the top 10 on the midterms, our protagonist shot her a cocky smirk, and he waved off the praise with a flick of his hand. He closed his eyes and proudly claimed that his success was owed entirely to his superior intellect. The girl, instantly annoyed by his narcissism, delivered a swift kick to his shin. She called him an ungrateful jerk and reminded him that her tutoring was the only reason he'd passed at all. Johnson hopped back, rubbing his leg and complaining about her aggression. She leaned in with a teasing grin, laughing that a tough fighter was scared of a little girl. He turned his head away, weakly denying it. While he was trying to duck out of the conversation nearby, students were staring in shock, recognizing the young woman. As the school's renowned beauty, many were baffled to see her smiling at someone like him, and they watched dripping with envy, wishing she would just look their way once. A man pushed his way through the crowd, muttering an apology as he brushed past a student. Stunned, the kid froze when he clocked the emblem stitched onto the guy's shirt. The insignia gleamed under the light, branding him as a member of the student council. Jianson's conversation was cut short by a sharp voice, rattling off his offenses for accumulated absences. 3 student council members blocked his path, informing him he was officially receiving a public warning for ditching class. The young woman stepped forward to back him up, explaining that his situation was complicated. President So shot them a stone-cold look, declaring that exceptions had to be requested in advance, and that no special privileges put anyone above school rules. She tried to argue back, but Jian-san stopped her, throwing a protective arm out in front of her. He stared at the president with utter indifference, and tossed out a short, unbothered question. His hands stayed buried in his pockets, showing zero concern for the authority figure posturing in front of him. President So then dropped his ultimatum. Jian-san had to deliver a public apology to the entire school after the flag-raising ceremony. He glared down at the supposed troublemaker and demanded a guarantee that this behavior would end immediately. Murmurs started spreading through the students, questioning if the council even had the authority to dish out that kind of punishment. But fear silenced them quick. Jian-san met the threat with a cold smirk and asked what would happen if he refused. So's face darkened. He warned that disobedience would escalate the issue to the Office of Academic Affairs. His eyes sharpened as he delivered his final threat. This could cost him his graduation. Jian-san realized the whole truancy charge was just a flimsy excuse. This guy was clearly out to get him. President So and his crew stepped forward, radiating the dangerous aura of people who knew how to throw a punch. Lingxi couldn't hold her tongue any longer and yelled that the president was being completely irrational. So let out a low laugh and shot a menacing look her way, hinting that she should follow the rules or his guys could teach her a lesson. Jian-san cut off the intimidation attempt, bored by the long, pointless speech. He calmly asked for the official documents and demanded to see a disciplinary file stamped with the principal's seal. Another council member stiffened and claimed the student council had every right to enforce the rules without needing that piece of paper. Jian-san tore that argument apart, concluding this was nothing more than a power trip. He warned him that starting a scene on a fake pretext is a dangerous game when you don't know who you're targeting. He closed the distance with the student leader, his presence growing heavy and dark, and dropped a terrifying question. Did the person pulling So's strings forget to mention that some people are untouchable? His eyes seemed to flash with a reddish tint As he silently dared the group to continue their little act, Jian-san leaned in slightly, his voice low and icy, as he hinted that some predators are far too dangerous to provoke. So was paralyzed, his pupils trembling under the weight of an aura that was crushing him. He tried to ask if that was a threat, but the cold sweat dripping down his forehead betrayed his fake courage. Lynchie jumped between them, trying to de-escalate the situation, before it exploded. With a nervous laugh, she insisted it was all a misunderstanding and urged them to keep it cool in public. Just like that, Jian-san dropped the aggressive intent, his expression reverting to that of a typical student. Lingxi turned around and casually mentioned she had to get home before her dad started to worry, ending the tense showdown with a surprisingly simple excuse. Jian-san walked away without a second glance, strolling calmly as Lingxi followed close behind. The president so screamed at their backs, vowing to crush his arrogance, but his threats fell on deaf ears. He was left there trembling with rage, completely alone. The scene shifts to the main school building. Outside the academic affairs office, a stern voice echoed from within, complaining about the rebellious attitude of the current generation. Inside, the student council president was fuming, standing in front of the desk and shouting about Jian-san. He ran down a long list of infractions, accusing him of constantly skipping classes, ignoring school discipline, and publicly humiliating a member of the student council. So's face was flushed with anger as he argued that such a defiant attitude couldn't be tolerated. Director Wan sat uncomfortably holding a teacup as if it were a shield. He winced at the volume of the yelling, muttering Jian-san's name in confusion as he tried to process the sudden verbal onslaught. He finally managed to say the case needed to be analyzed more carefully before anyone jumped to conclusions. Looking exhausted, he explained that you can't just listen to one side of the story. Director Wan leaned back in his chair with a bored expression and spoke with a condescending tone. He explained that handling students required a delicate touch, insisting this situation was on a whole other level compared to typical cases. So froze solid when he heard that phrase, repeating it back in total confusion. Director Wang cleared his throat again, calmly mentioning that personal instructions had come down from the highest authorities for him to be given special treatment. Su's jaw hit the floor, his white-hot anger instantly replaced by stunned disbelief. A cold sweat broke out across his face as Director Wang leaned in and asked if he truly understood what that meant. So stammered out the director's title, a wave of horror washing over him as he realized a simple principle had zero power against the school's board of directors. In the school hierarchy, they were worlds apart. The image of the institutional org chart flashed in his mind. It hammered home just how insignificant his place was compared to the giants protecting Jian-san. Director Wang collapsed into his chair, feeling the soul-crushing weight of the school's power structure on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't afford to piss off the people who had Jian-san's back. He stared blankly into space, sweating bullets, trying to process the reality that a supposed problem student had such a monstrously powerful background. Director Wang spun around to face his nephew, planting a firm hand on his chest to stop him from doing something incredibly stupid. Speaking as family now, not as an administrator, he warned him in a grave tone to never ever provoke Jian-san. He brought up the fallen Yantianli family, reminding him how even a clan that powerful was completely erased overnight. He leaned in close, his face pale with raw fear, and stressed that they both knew the miserable end waiting for those who crossed the wrong people. The nephew gritted his teeth, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage, completely refusing to accept the situation. He roared with fury over the humiliation he'd endured that day, but Director Wang tried to talk him down. The young man refused to let go of his grudge, repeating over and over that the shame was too immense to just ignore. The director cut him off, ordering him to shut up before he made everything 1,000 times worse. The boy was trembling with barely contained anger. Veins bulged on his forehead as he fought not to completely blow up, cursing in frustration, unable to accept defeat. Ignoring the warning completely, he stormed out of the office, hell-bent on punishing Jian-san, no matter what it took. Director Wang let out a helpless sigh as he watched him go, his heart heavy in his chest. He thought to himself that the youth are often too blind to see the cliff they're walking straight towards. The scene cuts to that night where the name of young Master So echoes in the darkness over the noise of a wild party. Laughter spills from a rooftop bar, where Su is trying to drown his seething rage in alcohol. He slammed his glass down on the table and screamed insults into the air, unable to forget the absolute humiliation he'd been forced to suffer. The women with him tried to soothe him, encouraging him to just drink more and forget all his problems. A blonde woman wrapped her arms around him, trying to console him, and hinting she could make him feel a lot better. A voice observed the drunk's pathetic state, noting just how deep his hatred for Jian-san ran. Su whipped around, sweating and desperate, trying to find who was laughing at him. Chenju remained calmly in the shadows, claiming that who he was didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that they shared a common enemy. Those words sliced through the alcoholic haze, leaving So completely baffled. He eyed the stranger with suspicion, wondering if he was actually talking about Jian-san. His curiosity surged, needing to know what kind of grudge this guy had against his rival. Chenju took one slow step forward, the sound of his shoe clicking on the pavement. He brushed off the reason for his own hatred, calling the story boring, but he promised the results would be incredibly interesting. He leaned in slightly, preying on the drunk's wounded pride, and hinted at whether he wanted to make his enemy taste the very same bitterness he was feeling. Su looked back at him, face flushed and confused. With no idea how to react to the offer, Chenju twisted the knife, admitting their target was a difficult one to take down, which only cranked up Su's desperation. The trap worked perfectly. Su's head shot up, his eyes wide with anxiety, asking if there was really a way for him to win. Chenju replied with a smile that was both charming and dripping with danger, inviting him to have a chat and promising he had exactly what Su needed. His cunning expression made it clear the fish had taken the bait. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the campus as the school bell rang out in a steady rhythm. The main character's bald friend called out to him, trying to get him to finally wake up. The professor was screaming furiously at the sleeping student in the back row. Jian-san's head was still planted on his desk, half asleep, mumbling for just 5 more minutes as if he were still in his own bed. The professor looked like he was about to literally explode from pure rage. She made it clear she wasn't his mom, silenced the rest of the class, and then dropped the news that they were getting a new transfer student. A blonde kid strolled in with his hands shoved in his pockets, instantly grabbing everyone's attention. He introduced himself as Yuchen, flashing a friendly smile. But that smile never quite reached his sharp golden eyes. The sound of that voice jolted Jian-san awake. He stared, his mind reeling with disbelief. As it clicked who had just walked in, the name Chenju echoed like a gunshot in his head. While he watched the newcomer, he scanned his face, unable to process the impossible reality staring him down. The features were a perfect match. They belonged to the ruthless criminal kingpin he had declared war against. Jian-san's shock curdled into pure horror. He would recognize that face, even if it were burned to ash, but he couldn't wrap his head around why his mortal enemy was now standing in his classroom. The teacher, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding, pointed to the empty seat right behind Jian-san and cheerfully told him to get along with his new classmate. Yu-chen claimed the seat and let out a low, menacing laugh. It was a sound meant only for Jian-san to hear. From his new perch, he smirked with satisfaction, positioned perfectly behind his prey. He leaned forward just slightly, and with sickeningly fake politeness, greeted the student who had gone completely rigid. Jian-san remained frozen as the criminal asked for his guidance, the threat laced in every single word. He stared blankly at his textbook, a cold sweat breaking out across his face as he felt the monster's breath on the back of his neck. An unhinged laugh ripped through the night silence, echoing from the top floors of a luxurious villa. Outside, startled birds scattered into the darkness as the cackling continued without a single pause. Inside the mansion, 2 bodyguards sprinted toward the source of the noise, raw panic plastered on their faces. They called out for their young master, terrified that he had finally snapped or was under attack. But Yu-chen was just standing before a floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the moonlit city below. As his men watched in confusion, Yu-chen ordered them to maintain absolute silence, claiming he was concentrating on what he called his homework. The bodyguards stood motionless, watching their boss hunched over a notebook with an almost academic intensity. He was writing furiously, and he'd titled his master strategy, "The Plan to Shatter the Heavens." He marked down the first step, the most crucial part of his revenge. He had to become Jian-san's best friend. A twisted smile stretched across his face as he vowed to make his enemy wish for death. His eyes gleamed with a crazed light as he savored the psychological torment he was cooking up. He pictured the deception planning to completely obliterate Jian-san's defenses by acting like a loyal brother. In his warped fantasy, the two of them were laughing and sharing jokes, building a bond based entirely on lies. Once he had earned that trust, he would uncover every single one of Jian-san's weaknesses. His ultimate goal wasn't just to kill him, it was to break his mind and torture him relentlessly from the inside. He imagined himself standing over a helpless Jian-san, watching as despair slowly ate away at his soul, and he exploded into another fit of manic laughter at the thought of his enemy, turned into a complete and utter clown. The scene cuts to the school's outdoor track, where the coach announced the start of the boys' endurance test. Yu-chen was warming up right beside his target, recalling the intel that said Jian-san had a powerful sense of justice. A sinister glint flashed in his golden eyes as he prepared to use that very weakness against him. The runners took their positions, tension crackling in the air as they waited for the signal. The whistle blew hard, and they all shot forward. Jian-san naturally took the lead, but Yu-chen stayed right on his tail, biding his time for the perfect moment. Then he made his move, tripping on purpose, crying out that he was about to fall and calling for him to help him. But the protagonist just kept running, not even glancing back. Yu-chen was left on his knees, stunned. He had screamed to really sell the injury, but Jian-san had completely ignored his performance. Sweat poured down his face. As the humiliation washed over him, though, his shame was cut short when a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. The gym teacher came running, determined to get the injured student to the nurse's office. Yu-chen panicked and tried to wave off the help, wanting nothing more than to end the embarrassing scene. But the teacher wasn't taking no for an answer, convinced that such a dramatic fall had to be serious. Yu Chen tried to back away, realizing his acting had worked a little too well on the wrong person. Operating under a safety-first philosophy, the coach scooped him up into a humiliating bridal-style carry. Yu Chen kicked and screamed, dying of embarrassment, as he was carried off like some damsel in distress. The teacher marched toward the nurse's office, boasting about his own strength, while his victim continued to protest. Jian-san watched the absurd spectacle completely bewildered. He stared at the retreating figures and wondered if the ruthless Yu Chen was actually just a clumsy, childish idiot with terrible balance. A cold sweat trickled down his back as he analyzed his enemy's bizarre behavior. He considered the possibility that Yu Chen was faking his clumsiness just to make him lower his guard. The scene then shifts to the school laboratory. The professor tells the class to partner up for the experiment, and just like that, Yu Chen sees his opening. He strolls right up to Yan-san's table, casually suggesting they just skip the whole ammonia step. Yan-san completely ignores the intrusion, his focus lasered in on the chemicals, while his current partner whines about the intense smell. Yu Chen calls out his name, trying to get a reaction. Yan-san whips around instantly, his entire body on high alert to the threat standing right behind him. A sweet, totally fake smile spreads across Yu Chen's face. He's playing the role of the enthusiastic new kid to perfection, asking Yan-san to show him the ropes. He proposes they team up, but some territorial classmate immediately intercepts him. Denji aggressively plants himself between them, blocking the path to Yan-san. He puffs out his chest and loudly declares that he is the only one worthy of being Yan-san's #1 subordinate. Yu Chen just blinks, completely bewildered. Denji then shoots him a proud thumbs up, treating his follower status like it's some grand honor. He warns the new guy not to even dream of stealing his position. Yu Chen just stares back in disbelief, wondering why anyone would be so damn determined to be a simple lackey. When he tries to step around him, Denji shuts him down without a second thought and turns back to his work with Yan-san, even whispering a ridiculous warning. He claims the new guy is so clumsy he trips on flat ground and would probably make the whole place explode with the ammonia bottles. Yu Chen overhears the insult, completely stunned. He can't believe some idiot is actually questioning his coordination. Denji flashes a smug grin, proud of his little strategy to isolate the transfer student. Yu Chen feels a vein begin to throb in his forehead, realizing his personal hate list is growing by the minute. He glares at the kid, mentally logging his name Denji. In his mind, he congratulates the moron for earning a spot on his kill list. Later that night, Yan-san is walking the school beauty, home, half listening to her ramble on about some cowardly cat as she giggles. But Yan-san's mind is locked on the predator, now lurking in his classroom. His face hardens, finally realizing Yu Chen had been trying to get close to him all day. It was a clear signal the game was on. And while the new student looked innocent enough, he warned himself never to underestimate the dangerous threat the boy posed. She cuts through his thoughts, pointing down a side alley and asking if a fight is breaking out. Yan-san brushes it off immediately and tells her to hurry up, saying he's hungry. She stops dead in her tracks, confused. His complete indifference is baffling, and she asks why he won't step in to help. Yan-san doesn't even look back coldly, stating he has no reason to get involved. The young woman watches his retreating back, thinking that this kind of heartless attitude just wasn't like him. Down in the alley, a group of thugs has the blonde transfer student surrounded. They've got him grabbed by the shirt collar, demanding he pay a fee for walking on their turf. Yu Chen immediately slips into victim mode, begging and claiming he doesn't have any money. He flinches back, faking absolute terror. He screams for someone to help, crying that he's too fragile to take a hit. The school beauty overhears the shakedown and questions Yan-san again, shocked that they're just walking away from this. Yan-san completely dodges the moral dilemma by pointing to a food stand, trying to distract her with the promise of grilled sausages. She stays frozen, staring at him with pure disappointment. Seeing his audience leaving, Yu Chen knows he can't let this chance go. He gets right in the main thug's face, and he demands the guy hit him with everything he's got. The goon whispers back that he doesn't have the guts to actually do it. Yu Chen snarls that he'll chop off his fingers and make him swallow them if he doesn't throw the punch right now. Shaking with pretend fear, the thug apologizes for what he's about to do clumsily, balls up his fist and warns him that he's going to swing. The goon winds up. Instead of a weak tap, he delivers a brutal punch that connects with the force of a sledgehammer. It crushes Yu Chen's nose and practically rattles his skull. The thug just stands there and innocently confirms he was just following instructions. Yu Chen's performance is masterful. He starts coughing violently, spitting up blood to sell a life-threatening injury. His life. For a split second, the facade drops. He glances at a bloody tooth in the palm of his hand and coldly acknowledges the hired goon's perfect precision. With an icy voice, he orders him to continue the beating without a pause, until Yan-san finally comes to play the savior. His tone drops to a razor-sharp whisper as he threatens to rip out all of the thug's teeth if the performance stops even 1 second too soon. The delinquents, now trembling with very real fear, agree to the twisted plan. Yu Chen immediately snaps back into character, screaming at the top of his lungs about his broken teeth, making sure his wails are heard. All the way out on the main street, the cries reach Lingxi, who finds herself unable to ignore such a desperate plea. She refused to stand by and watch a classmate get pummeled, so she sprinted headfirst into danger. Yansan desperately yelled for her to stop, his voice filled with frustration as she walked straight into the ambush set up in the alley. The hired thugs stuck to the script, landing brutal kicks on Yu Chen as he cowered and scrambled across the dirty pavement. But before this charade could go any further, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the violence. Lingxi appeared, her face a mask of pure rage, pointing a finger at the attackers and demanding they stop that instant. The delinquents were totally thrown off. Their job was to ambush some dude with black hair, not a random student. Annoyed by the interruption, they mocked her, warning her to get lost before she got herself hurt. But Lingxi didn't flinch. Her eyes blazed with righteous anger as she declared it was her duty to protect any student from her school. Even though her body trembled slightly with fear, she stood her ground, a wall between them and their target. She threw her arms open, shielding the supposedly injured boy with her own body. Her voice stuttered, but she didn't budge, declaring that she was his protection now. The leader of the goons just scoffed at her bravery, threatening that they wouldn't go easy on her just because she was a girl. Lingxi shot back that retreating would only fuel their arrogance, swearing she would never negotiate with scum like them. The thugs laughed shamelessly, claiming that shaking people down was just an honest hustle to support their families. Outraged, she accused them of preying on defenseless students. That's when the lead thug's patience snapped, and he swung a vicious punch straight for her face. His fist rocketed forward with bone-breaking force, but out of nowhere a hand shot out and stopped the punch cold with a deafening crack. The gangster froze his wrist, caught in a grip of solid steel as a dark figure loomed over him. And a single glowing red eye flared with murderous intent, as Yansan effortlessly neutralized the attack. The terror in Lingxi's eyes instantly melted into overwhelming relief, as she recognized the silhouette protecting her. Yansan glared at the attacker with absolute contempt, his expression twisting into a cold, terrifying mask. He wasted no time on hollow threats, uttering just 2 words that sealed the thug's fate. His stare was so menacing it felt like it could freeze the blood in their veins. That crimson glow promised total annihilation if they dared to make another move. The criminals trembled, but then just as suddenly, Yansan's killing intent vanished. The thug scrambled away in a panic before he could change his mind. Yansan turned to Lingxi, his voice softening as he checked if she was hurt. She quickly assured him she was fine. She gently scolded him for always having to play the hero, but he just leaned in with a smug smirk. And he asked if she was actually worried about him. Before she could even answer, a loud wail completely shattered the moment. Yu Chen launched himself at Yansan, clinging to his hand, and putting on an over-the-top, tearful thank you performance. The undercover crime boss dropped to his knees, staging a pathetic act while dabbing at a fake tear. As he spun a sob story about being targeted as the lonely new kid, Lingxi just stared at the whole scene in utter disbelief. Yu Chen stuck to Yansan like a lost puppy, pleading for protection from future bullies, and forcing a deeply uncomfortable bond. Yansan played along with the ruse, announcing loudly that from this day forward, he would personally look after the new student. But underneath his friendly mask, he was seething with rage, realizing his enemy wasn't just targeting him. He was using Lingxi as bait to get closer. Yu Chen flashed a sickeningly sweet smile as he shook Yansan's hand. The 2 enemies locked hands in a firm grip, their smiles barely concealing the raw intent to murder each other. In the days that followed, the entire vibe at school changed. Yu Chen followed Yansan like a shadow, constantly trailing him and Denji through the halls. Yansan was always glancing over his shoulder, his guard up every single second. He knew that smiling student was a monster. Waiting for the perfect moment to strike, Yu Chen flawlessly played the role of the enthusiastic helper, always offering to run errands. And he'd buy them drinks with a charming smile. Denji wasn't buying the act for a second. He would make annoyed gestures before finally just bolting down the hallway, yelling at the clingy transfer student to get lost. Yu Chen would simply chase them with a persistent, annoying energy, privately reflecting on all the effort this deception was taking. All of it just to close the distance to his prey. Later, in front of a quiet apartment building, a cheerful humming sound cut through the evening air. Yu Chen waved enthusiastically at Denji, acting as if they were lifelong best friends. Denji nearly jumped out of his skin when he realized the transfer student had literally followed him home. He yelled down in confusion, seeing him just lurking on the street. Yu Chen joked that he was a professional stalker before laughing to cut the tension. He held up a gift bag, revealing his supposed real reason for showing up. He thanked Denji, assuring him that thanks to his and Yansan's protection, the bullies. Once they were in the clear, Yu Chen slid a seriously expensive-looking gift box his way as a thank you. Denji took it, his eyes widening in disbelief. He instantly recognized the top-tier gadget inside. He was staring at a high-end portable power station right there in his hands. A tremor of pure excitement shot through him. He couldn't process that he was actually holding the insane piece of tech he'd only ever dreamed about, but knew he could never afford. Yu Chen casually slung an arm around Denji's shoulders, playing the part of the generous new bestie perfectly. Then he smoothly pivoted the conversation, asking if Denji was tight with Jian-san. Denji's chest puffed out with pride as he declared they were practically brothers. A smirk crept onto Yu Chen's face as he started digging for details about Jian-san's daily grind and his every move. Denji rattled off the usual boring routine classes, working out and running the company, but then he trailed off. His whole expression shifted as he realized the questions were getting way too specific. He shot a suspicious glare at the transfer student, demanding to know why he was digging so deep into Jian-san's life. Yu Chen tried to mask his shady intentions with a casual laugh, playing it off like he was just curious. But then he leaned in closer, his smile turning ice-cold and predatory, reminding Denji of the very expensive gift sitting in his lap. The friendly act dropped completely. He went straight for his real target, demanding insider info on Jian-san's business. He disguised the interrogation as personal ambition, saying he just wanted to get on the payroll, dangling the promise of a shared payday to bait Denji into spilling secrets.